Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. Today, I wanted to introduce you to the case of Stacy Castor. It is a horrifying example of calculating and crimes committed in cold blood. And as you will see for yourself, the events I will cover are even more shocking than they may seem at first. Stacy Daniel was born on July 24, 1967 in Clay, New York as an only daughter. Growing up, Stacy was well-liked and had many friends. In 1985, when she was just 17 at a friend's party, she met Michael Wallace, who was 6 years older than her. They immediately caught each other's eye, and they found a mutual understanding. It didn't take long before they started dating. Stacy considered Michael as the love of her life. In 1988, Stacy and Michael, for the first time, became parents. Their daughter, Ashley Wallace, was born, and in 1991, Stacy gave birth to a second daughter, Bree. At the time, Stacy was employed by an ambulance dispatch, and her husband worked nights as a mechanic. They didn't earn much, plus they didn't have much time for each other due to differing work schedules. Stacy worked on the day shift, and Michael worked nights. Despite the lack of time and tight finances, the parents had a good relationship with their daughters. According to Stacy, her husband was very close to Bree, and she was best friends with Ashley. On the outside, the family seemed exemplary. However, in reality, over the years, their relationship began to deteriorate. In the late 1990s, there were rumors that both Stacy and Michael had gotten into affairs. In addition, according to Stacy, her husband had a growing problem with alcohol and psychoactive drug abuse. He drank to the point that he was repeatedly pulled over for traffic offenses under the influence of alcohol. According to a former friend, she was seriously considered divorced. In the winter of 1999, Michael began to decline in health. According to his loved ones, he was very weak, and among other things, he was troubled by a cough. Of course, he went to a doctor about it, however, no definite diagnosis. Initially, the doctor thought that Michael might have an inner ear infection. A few weeks later, on January 11, 2000, Michael was found unconscious on the sofa at home by his older daughter, Ashley. He was taken to the hospital, but unfortunately, it turned out to be too late. Michael was pronounced dead. He was only 38 years old at the time. Ashley was 11 years old at the time, and the whole situation was dramatic for her. At the time her father lost consciousness, she was the only one present in the house, and for a long time she blamed herself for his death. Earlier that day, she had noticed that her father looked bad. In the afternoon, she went to pick up her younger sister from school, and when she returned, she discovered that he had lost consciousness. Doctors told Stacy that her husband had Michael's sister, however, had some doubts and suggested that it might be worth conducting an autopsy to determine the specific cause of death and, in addition, maybe the doctors would finally succeed in discovering what the mysterious illness was that her brother had been struggling with for the last weeks of his life, especially since the doctors had previously mentioned nothing about the problems with his heart. Refused to perform an autopsy because she said it would only cause more pain for the family and delay Michael's funeral and farewell. She also believed that doctors were correct after the loss of her husband. She received a payout from an insurance policy worth $55,000 after losing her spouse, so suddenly Stacy devoted herself wholeheartedly to work in order to support her family. Her older daughter Ashley, who until then had been very close to her and considered her best friend, said she very rarely saw her mother. Stacy was practically not at home. A year after Michael's death, through her boss, Stacy met divorced man David Castor. On August 16, 2003, their wedding took place. The couple settled in the city of Syracuse in New York State. David, unlike to Stacy's first husband, was very conscientious, responsible, and liked to spend his time actively. He rode motorcycles, water scooters, and snowmobiles, and sailed boats. He did not drink alcohol and did not lead a party lifestyle. He ran a well-promoting family business installing heating and air conditioning systems, which he founded with his father. Stacy often said that David was the support she so desperately needed. He gave her strength and security. After her marriage, she became an accountant and secretary in her husband's company. They both had children from previous relationships. David had an adult son, David Jr. According to Stacy, at first her teenage daughters were not happy about her new marriage. They did not want another husband tried to replace their father. The beginning of the relationship with their stepfather was therefore difficult. The teenagers rebelled. When David tried to discipline them, they did not want to listen to his instructions. Over time, however, they managed to get closer to each other, and relations warmed up considerably. Sometimes there were arguments between Stacy and David because he spent a lot of money. David was able to spend considerable sums of money on his hobbies, which his wife did not like. On August 22, 2005, shortly after their second wedding anniversary, an unexpected tragedy occurred. Around 2 p.m. that day, Stacy called the emergency number and informed the local services that the previous day around 5 p.m. she had argued with her spouse. After that, he had locked himself in a room and until now has not come out. He does not answer knocks on the door, nor does he answer the phone. Stacy said that at first she thought that her husband simply needed to cool off after the misunderstanding and relax, but now she was beginning to worry about his health and even his life. In a conversation with the dispatcher, she claimed that David had been suffering from depression after the death of his father. When the police arrived at the scene, David still wouldn't open the door. Therefore, Sergeant Robert Willoughby decided to break them down. Inside, he found 48-year-old David lying on the bed face down. Puddle of vomit. Among the items near his body were a container of antifreeze and a half-full glass of bright green liquid. Everything pointed to the fact that David had taken his own life. However, the suicide note was nowhere to be found. Willoughby says he remembers that his wife Stacy screamed, "He's not dead. He's not dead." Asked during questioning about this why for nearly 20 hours she didn't try to get into the bedroom or didn't call for help sooner. She said she was convinced her husband was asleep. The coroner concluded that David Castor took his own life by ingesting a lethal dose of ethylene glycol, which is the main ingredient in antifreeze. The news of David's sudden death, and more importantly its cause, shocked his loved ones. From the very beginning, his ex-wife, Janice Poisson Farmer, and even his stepdaughter, Ashley, claimed that there was no way that David had committed suicide, and the police also quite quickly began to have suspicions that third parties were involved, and eyes were on Stacy Castor. Police found Stacy Castor's fingerprints on the antifreeze glass and located a turkey baster that had David's DNA on the tip. They began to suspect that Stacy engineered her husband's death. In addition, doubts were raised by the fact that David, who was a hunter and kept a firearm under his bed, preferred to drink antifreeze and die in pain rather than use a gun and die quickly. It didn't make sense. Everything pointed to the fact that it was the wife who used the turkey baster to forcefully infuse her spouse with poison. Detective Dominic Spinelli began an investigation that would eventually take as long as 2 years. 3 months after David's death, Spinelli also began to take an interest in the mysterious death of Stacy's first husband, Michael Wallace. He saw some similarities in the accidents that happened to both men. He contacted the Cayuga County Police Department about the matter. Stacy claimed that Michael had suffered from a variety of medical conditions, but after looking at his medical records, investigators concluded that there was no indication that Michael had any pre-existing illnesses. It was suspected that the first husband may have been poisoned with antifreeze, just as David later was. This is a painful death that leads to the formation of crystals in internal organs, and suffering can last up to 72 hours before death occurs. Police officials concluded that the only way to prove that Stacy was responsible for both deaths was to exhume Michael's body, and it was done on September 5, 2007. After the autopsy, Sergeant Michael Norton recalled that the forensic doctor had told him that Wallace was loaded with crystals. In addition, police managed to get information that 3 months before his death, Michael told his doctor that he felt like he was drunk, although he had not consumed alcohol. This is one of the symptoms, ethylene glycol poisoning. At that point, practically no one had any more doubts about Stacy's guilt, but it was still necessary to find irrefutable evidence. So the investigators set up a wiretap in her home and recorded phone calls. During one conversation with close friend Danny Coleman, Stacy said she was horrified by what was going on around her and by the police's suspicions. Because she has nothing to do with her husband's death, she is completely innocent. Cameras were also set up overlooking her home and the graves of her husbands, who were buried next to each other. Michael's brother-in-law, Jonathan, even asked Stacy once pointedly if she was collecting her dead husbands that she buried them next to each other. Investigators concluded that if she actually loved her husbands as much as she claimed, she would certainly visit their graves, and they wanted to monitor how she would behave then. Ultimately, however, she never showed up there, which in itself was already suspicious. According to David Castor's last will, his entire estate was transferred to Stacy and her daughters. Interestingly, his birth son David Jr. was not mentioned in the will. Shortly thereafter, Stacy sold his family's business for nearly $200,000. In September 2007, investigators called Stacy in for questioning. During her interview with the detective, she recalled watching a TV show in which a woman poisoned two of her husbands with antifreeze. At some point, however, she realized she was being interrogated as a suspect and asked for a lawyer to be present. The police allowed her to leave the station, however, her cell phone and landline continued to be monitored 24 hours a day. A week after the hearing, a call to an emergency number was intercepted, which finally led to a breakthrough in the case. It turned out that on the morning of September 14th, Bree, the younger daughter of Stacy, found her older sister unconscious. The mother called the emergency room. During that call, Stacy was panicked and informed the dispatcher that her 19-year-old daughter Ashley had taken medication and that she had something in her throat. She shouted her name and repeated several times, "Oh my God." When news of the incident reached officers, they feared the worst, that another poisoning had occurred. Ashley was unconscious and unresponsive when rescuers arrived on the scene. It was unclear whether Ashley would survive the journey to the hospital. After a search of the house, they found an empty vodka bottle, several packages of medications, and a suicide letter written on a computer and printed out. In this letter, she was to confess to murdering her father, then her stepfather, and it was because of her guilt and fear of responsibility that she decided to take her own life as well. In the letter, she mentioned antifreeze as many as 4 times. Doctors did everything in their power to save Ashley's life, and the 19-year-old miraculously managed to survive. The next day, she regained consciousness but was dazed. Police officers asked questions she couldn't answer. She said she only remembered a man in a red shirt who asked her what had happened, what she had taken, and what she had drunk. She was most shocked when her younger sister, Bree, told her why she was hospitalized. Ashley categorically denied having anything to do with her father's death, her mother's second husband, and above all, she did not want to take her own life. During her testimony, she told investigators that the last thing she remembered was drinking alcohol with her mother on Thursday afternoon. She said they had both had a rough week and just wanted to get drunk and unwind. Stacy made them drinks, mixing vodka and Sprite. The daughter remembered that the drink tasted bad, however her mother encouraged her to drink it. Investigator Michael Norton claimed that after talking to Ashley, police were already certain that her mother was behind both crimes and now the attempted murder of her own daughter. Stacy Castor was arrested in a hospital parking lot on January 13, 2009, and stood trial charged with the murder of David and the attempted murder of her daughter, in addition to forging her husband's will. During the trial, more than 50 witnesses testified, and the jury deliberated for 3 days. Finally, on February 5, 2009, Stacy was found guilty on all 3 charges. After the verdict was announced, Ashley turned to her mother, saying that until now she didn't know what hate was, and that she now hated her but loved her at the same time. She added that she doesn't want to have any contact with her ever again, which is extremely difficult for her, because all her life she considered her mother her best friend. She added that she doesn't understand how she could do this to her. Before announcing his sentence, Judge Joseph Fahey mentioned that during his 34-year career in the judiciary, he had met in the courtroom many different criminals, including serial killers or contract killers. However, Stacy Castor is an absolute rarity. He has never met someone so calculating. Eventually, Castor heard a sentence of 54 years in prison. In February 2010, Onondaga County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick confirmed that his office was investigating, including the circumstances of the death of Stacy Castor's father, Jerry Daniels, in 2002. Family members have told investigators that Stacy was visiting her father at the time in the hospital while he was recovering from respiratory problems. She brought him water, and although his health seemed to be improving earlier, he died the next day. No charges were filed in the potential murder of her father and the death of her first husband. Stacy herself claimed that she was innocent and had nothing to do with the tragedy of both husband's father or daughter. She claimed that Ashley was responsible and that she had framed her. If that were the case, Ashley would have had to kill her father when she was only 11 years old. In May 2010, Stacy appealed, but her conviction was upheld. On June 11, 2016, Stacy died at the age of 48. The cause was a heart attack, and there was no third-party involvement in her death. At the time, she was in New York's Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for women. From the moment she was incarcerated, she never saw her daughters again. Ashley and Bree moved out of the family home and went to live with Ashley's boyfriend and his family. The older of the sisters says she still struggles to this day with the trauma caused by her mother's actions. It's very hard for her, but every day she tries to get up with a smile and motivate herself to not let her mother destroy her life as she planned. The two daughters still live in New York. Ashley is engaged, and Bree is concentrating on raising her children. Good morning to both of you again. Thank you. The biggest question I ask is why? Why did she do these things? I know that's probably never going to be answered. There are so many things that she has ruined. She'll never be able to see Bree graduate. My father will never take me down the aisle. She'll never get to see her grandchildren. All those things she took away from me. She killed 2 people and tried to kill me, and blame it on me, and blame me for the other deaths. That bothers me so much. I had to pretend for a year that everything was okay, that nothing was bothering me, even though I was worried about the trial and worried whether the jury would believe me. I hate my mother for ruining so many people's lives. I don't even know why she did it. What gave her the right to play God with people? And I hate her for having me be the one that found my dad, just like her for having Bree found me. I never knew what hate was until now. Even though I do hate her, I still love her at the same time. That bothers me, it's so confusing. How can you hate someone and love them at the same time? I just wish that she would say sorry for everything she did, including all the lies. And though I feel bad for her today, as she sits there all by herself, she's the one that did this to herself and nothing bothers her. After my mom is sentenced today, I'll go back to my loving home with people who care about me. She's not going to go home. And if she hadn't chose to do these things, she could be home with me and breathe. She would not have to worry about anything. I've cried enough tears about this, and I don't want to cry anymore. I just want it all to go away, but I know it will never go away. I have to live with this for the rest of my life. There are times when I get afraid, thinking I might turn out like her, because she was good at one time. Children like she did. I hate how she tried to make me look stupid in that note that she wrote. I've tried so hard to make something of myself. I have a 3 feet 9 inches GPA, and still she tried to make me look stupid. But Mr. Fitzpatrick made her look stupid with her lies. I hate how she made people choose side in our family with our friends. Bree and I are children. People are supposed to stand up for us, but she's an adult, and that is the decision she made. I think about this at night through her head, all the things that she can't do. I had all these fears about if the jury hadn't believed me. What if she got out and tried to hurt me again? Or what if she tried to hurt my sister? I didn't kill anyone, and I didn't try to kill myself. I would not believe my sister or Matt. I just don't understand how you can say you love someone, and in the next breath try to kill them. I wish she had told me what was going on. She was my best friend, and she took that all the way just because she got scared. Well, I was scared too when I was in the hospital by myself, and I wanted my mom. But she was the one that did this. I just want to sleep all night without thinking about this. I'm not an angry person, and I hate being mad at her. I want to be with her. I can't forgive her, but I'm not sure if I can. I just hope God can forgive her. She has to listen to me this time. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and this will be the last time I get a chance. As horrible as it makes me feel, this is goodbye, Mom. As hard as you tried, I survived and I will survive because now I'm surrounded by people that love me. I'm going to do good things in this world despite making me, in every sense of the word, an orphan. Thank you, Judge Fahy, for letting me express my feelings. Story 2. The Adriatic sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged outline of the Dalmatian coast, casting a fiery glow over the ancient city of Split, where cobblestone streets intertwined like veins through centuries-old stone buildings. Amidst the tourist throngs and vibrant cafes, a darker, hidden world thrived, one ruled not by history or culture but by whispered deals, violence, and the iron grip of organized crime. Detective Ana Maric, one of Croatia's most tenacious investigators, had spent years trying to unravel the tangled web of smuggling rings that had taken root along the coastline. This summer of 2017, however, was different. The calm surface of Split's picturesque harbor concealed an undercurrent of danger that even Anna could not have anticipated. A new player had entered the game, a shadowy figure known only by the alias Cormoran, whose operations spanned from drug trafficking to arms dealing, leveraging the city's strategic ports and labyrinthine alleyways with ruthless efficiency. Anna's latest case began with a series of seemingly unrelated events. a burned-out fishing boat discovered off the coast, a high-profile politician's aide found dead under suspicious circumstances, and a cache of counterfeit currency flooding the black market. But as she dug deeper, the threads began to weave together into a narrative of betrayal, corruption, and murder. Her investigation led her to a clandestine nightclub hidden beneath the old town's stone arches, where the city's elite rubbed shoulders with criminals, exchanging secrets over glasses of Dalmatian wine. It was here that Anna first glimpsed the true extent of Cormoran's network, a constellation of mercenaries, corrupt officials, and desperate men willing to risk everything for a piece of the lucrative illegal trade. Surveillance photos revealed clandestine meetings with foreign cartels, and phone intercepts hinted at plans far beyond Croatian shores. The stakes were rising, and the lines between friend and foe blurred in the smoky shadows of the city's underworld. At the heart of this growing storm was Luka Petrovic, a charismatic but dangerous man who ran one of the largest shipping companies in the region. Officially, his business was legitimate, but Anna's sources whispered of vessels carrying hidden compartments laden with cocaine and arms, sailing under the guise of routine cargo. Luka's influence extended into the corridors of power, shielding him from scrutiny and enabling his operations to flourish. Anna's own life was increasingly at risk. Anonymous threats appeared on her doorstep, and she was followed through narrow alleys and bustling markets. Yet, retreat was not an option. The city depended on her courage, and the victims of this criminal empire could no longer be ignored. With the help of her loyal partner, Marco, a former military intelligence officer with a knack for infiltration, Anna prepared to dismantle the empire piece by piece. Their plan was as daring as it was dangerous: to intercept a major shipment destined for the heart of Europe, a move that could cripple Cormoran's network and expose Luka's complicity. Meanwhile, beneath the city's ancient streets, another story unfolded, that of a young woman named Ivana, caught in the crossfire of the criminal underworld. She had been forced into a life of servitude, trafficked through a network that exploited women for the pleasure of wealthy clients and powerful figures. Ivana's escape from one such event brought her face to face with Anna, who saw in her the key to unraveling the human side of the criminal machine. Ivana's testimony would become the fragile thread connecting the ruthless operators with their victims, exposing the systemic abuse hidden beneath the city's tourist-friendly facade. But every step Ivana took toward freedom was shadowed by danger. Her handlers were relentless, and Cormoran's reach seemed limitless. Together with Anna and Marco, she became both a witness and a weapon, risking everything in the hope that justice could prevail. As summer deepened, the tension in Split escalated. The streets that once echoed with the laughter of holidaymakers now bore the weight of suspicion and fear. Undercover operations revealed double agents within the police force, turning allies into enemies overnight. Corruption was a virus spreading through every layer of society, threatening to suffocate those who dared to resist. Anna's own superiors pressured her to drop the case, citing political sensitivity and lack of evidence, but her resolve hardened. The lives destroyed by this criminal syndicate, from fishermen coerced into smuggling to children sold into servitude, demanded more than silence. In a city where history whispered from every stone, Anna knew this was a moment when the past's shadows collided with the present's turmoil, shaping a future that depended on whether justice could break through the veil of deceit. The climax was set for the early hours of a humid August morning. Intelligence had pinpointed the arrival of a cargo ship in the port of Split, rumored to be carrying a shipment that would solidify Cormoran's dominance for years to come. Anna and Marco coordinated a covert strike, assembling a team of trusted officers and international partners. As the ship docked, tension coiled tight in the air, every movement watched, every sound amplified in the heavy silence. The operation unfolded with cinematic precision. Officers moved silently through containers, uncovering hidden caches of drugs and weapons, while snipers covered escape routes and communication lines hummed with urgency. But the victory was bittersweet. In the chaos, Luka slipped away, protected by layers of deception and loyal guards. The sting had hit the syndicate hard, but the war was far from over. As dawn broke over the Adriatic, Anna stood watching the sea, knowing that Split's ancient stones held secrets that might never fully be uncovered, and that in the world of shadows, the battle for justice was a relentless, unending fight. The aftermath of the raid left the city of Split rattled, its underworld reeling from the sudden loss of a critical shipment and the exposure of some of its most trusted operatives. Yet, for Anna Merrick and her team, the victory was tenuous at best. Luka Petrovic's disappearance gnawed at them like an open wound, a constant reminder that the head of the serpent remained at large, weaving new schemes in the shadows. Anna spent sleepless nights poring over every piece of intelligence gathered, convinced that Luca's network was merely adapting, not collapsing. Her instincts proved true when an encrypted message intercepted from a burner phone hinted at a clandestine meeting in Dubrovnik, where Luca was rumored to be negotiating with a new, even more dangerous ally, an Eastern European arms dealer whose name alone struck fear into the hearts of those familiar with the continent's darkest corridors. Anna and Marco's investigation expanded rapidly, following trails across the Adriatic coast and into the rugged mountains where political unrest and lawlessness provided fertile ground for illicit trades. They uncovered a pattern of smuggling routes extending through Montenegro and Bosnia, connecting to broader networks that funneled weapons into conflict zones far beyond Croatia's borders. This revelation added a grim geopolitical dimension to their case. What began as a local crackdown now threatened to unravel threads reaching into international terror groups and corrupt politicians who manipulated their influence for personal gain. Each discovery weighed heavier on Anna, who found herself navigating a maze where allies were scarce and betrayal lurked behind every handshake. Her own department's resistance to pursuing leads that implicated powerful figures tested her resolve, forcing her to rely on a small circle of trusted confidants and the growing courage of witnesses like Ivana, whose resilience became a beacon amid the darkness. Ivana's journey was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Despite the trauma inflicted by years of exploitation, she fought to reclaim her identity and dignity, channeling her pain into testimony that pierced the veil of silence surrounding human trafficking rings operating under Cormoran's umbrella. Through her, Anna gained access to the hidden networks trafficking not only drugs and arms, but also vulnerable women and children, commodities in a ruthless trade driven by greed and cruelty. The stories Ivana shared revealed a horrifying depth of corruption that penetrated law enforcement, judiciary, and even charitable organizations, all complicit through negligence or active participation. Anna documented every detail meticulously, aware that the strength of their case depended on exposing these systemic failures. It was a race against time, as every piece of evidence brought threats of retaliation, attempts at bribery, and even attempts on their lives. Meanwhile, the city's facade of normalcy cracked under the strain. Nightly news broadcasts reported clashes between police and masked gangs. Graffiti sprouted slogans calling for justice and reform, and citizens began organizing community patrols to reclaim their neighborhoods. The sense of fear mingled with hope, and Anna often found herself torn between her professional duty and the emotional toll of witnessing her beloved city fracture. Marco, ever pragmatic, urged caution and strategic patience, reminding her that dismantling such an entrenched system required precision, not recklessness. Yet Anna's intuition pushed her toward bolder moves, especially after receiving an anonymous tip pointing to a hidden warehouse near the industrial district where a major shipment was expected to pass. The tip came with a cryptic warning: the deeper you dig, the darker it gets. Acting on this lead, Anna orchestrated a midnight raid with a select team, aware that any mistake could cost lives. As they approached the dilapidated building, silence swallowed the air, broken only by the distant hum of the city's nightlife. Inside, they discovered a labyrinth of crates filled not with expected goods, but with forged passports, weapons, and encrypted communication devices. The evidence suggested a sophisticated operation supporting not just trafficking, but identity fraud and espionage, blurring lines between organized crime and political intrigue. Suddenly, their operation was not just about bringing criminals to justice, but about uncovering a shadow war being waged beneath the surface of everyday life. The discovery sent shockwaves through Croatian intelligence circles, forcing reluctant cooperation from agencies previously hesitant to get involved. Yet it also exposed Anna and her team to increased danger as powerful figures moved swiftly to silence any threat to their hidden agendas. Among the seized materials was a notebook, its pages filled with coded entries referencing dates, locations, and names, a treasure trove of information waiting to be deciphered. Back at headquarters, Anna worked with cryptologists and cyber experts to unravel the code, each breakthrough revealing deeper layers of conspiracy. The notebook hinted at plans for an arms deal far larger than anything previously suspected, involving shipments destined for conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa, implicating a network that spanned continents. It was a chilling reminder that local criminal enterprises like Cormoran's were not isolated gangs, but integral parts of global crime syndicates fueling instability worldwide. Anna felt the weight of responsibility keenly. Catching these criminals was not just about restoring peace to Split, but about confronting forces whose violence reverberated far beyond Croatian borders. The climax of this phase of the investigation came with a daring sting operation on a yacht moored near the historic fortress of Klis, where Luka was believed to meet his new partners. Anna and Marko coordinated with Interpol and Croatian special forces, setting up a covert perimeter as dusk fell. The atmosphere was electric with tension, every sense heightened, every step measured. When Luka appeared, flanked by heavily armed guards, the operation sprang into motion. A fierce firefight erupted, echoing off the stone walls, shadows dancing amidst gunfire and shouted orders. In the chaos, Luka was captured, but not before uttering a warning that shattered Anna's hopes for closure. "You think this ends with me? The game has only just begun." His arrest was a major blow to the syndicate, but also a harbinger of darker days ahead. As the dust settled, Anna stood once more overlooking the Adriatic Sea from the ancient walls of Split, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The city, scarred but resilient, whispered promises of renewal beneath its centuries-old stones. The battle against crime was far from over, but the first decisive blows had been struck. In the face of corruption, violence, and betrayal, Anna Marek embodied the stubborn hope that justice could prevail, that even in the darkest corners of Croatia's criminal underworld, the light of courage and truth could shine through. The capture of Luka Petrovic sent shockwaves through Split's criminal underworld, but the fragile calm that followed was deceptive. While the city's law enforcement celebrated a hard-won victory, Anna Marek understood that removing a single kingpin was merely removing one piece of a sprawling, intricate puzzle. Luka's warning echoed relentlessly in her mind. The game has only just begun. Indeed, the true power behind the syndicate was buried deeper, tangled in layers of corruption and hidden alliances that extended beyond Croatia's borders and infiltrated political offices, corporate boardrooms, and international black markets. As the investigation pivoted from Luka's immediate circle to the shadows he once commanded, Anna and her team faced a labyrinth of deceit, requiring them to tread carefully among enemies who could be anywhere, and allies who might betray them at any moment. One of the most pressing challenges came in the form of the political fallout. Several prominent public officials, previously regarded as untouchable, began to show cracks in their stoic facades as whispers of their connections to the syndicate surfaced. These revelations brought to light a grim reality. The crime network's tentacles had wrapped tightly around governmental structures, ensuring protection, impunity, and access to resources impossible for ordinary criminals to obtain. Anna's efforts to expose these ties were met with vehement resistance. She found herself under intense pressure from superiors to dial back the investigation, to avoid rocking the boat too hard. But her resolve was unwavering. Guided by a growing network of whistleblowers and courageous journalists, Anna dug deeper, compiling dossiers on individuals whose names had surfaced repeatedly and intercepted, communications and financial records. Among the most troubling discoveries was evidence of money laundering through ostensibly legitimate businesses. Construction firms, import-export companies, and even charity organizations masquerading as fronts for illicit activities. The scope and scale of these operations were staggering. It became clear that the syndicate was not just about violence and intimidation. It was a sophisticated enterprise, weaving crime into the very fabric of the economy. With each new lead, Anna felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. This was no longer a mere police investigation. It was a battle to reclaim the integrity of a nation and restore faith in its institutions. The stakes could not have been higher. She was no longer just fighting criminals. She was fighting a system that seemed determined to protect them. At the same time, the personal toll of the case began to manifest in unexpected ways. Anna found herself increasingly isolated, both from colleagues wary of crossing powerful figures and from friends who feared for her safety. Sleepless nights and relentless pressure blurred the lines between her professional and private lives. Her mentor, veteran investigator Marko, became one of the few constants in a turbulent sea of uncertainty. Their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared danger and unyielding pursuit of justice. Together, they navigated the murky waters of bureaucracy and subterfuge, determined to dismantle the web of crime thread by thread. Yet even Marko could not shield Anna from the harsh reality that their enemies had eyes everywhere, and that each step forward invited retaliation. Retaliation came swiftly and violently. One cold evening, as Anna returned home, she narrowly escaped an attempted ambush. a car skidding to a stop beside her, masked figures lunging out with weapons raised. Thanks to quick reflexes and the timely arrival of backup, she survived unharmed, but the message was clear. Those she hunted would not surrender without a fight. The attack galvanized her team, intensifying their efforts to uncover the masterminds behind the syndicate's operations. With security heightened and new protocols in place, Anna refused to yield. The hunt pressed onward, spanning from coastal villas to grimy docks, from high-rise offices to clandestine meeting rooms hidden beneath the city's ancient streets. In the midst of this turmoil, a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source. Ivana, the survivor whose courage had ignited the initial investigation into trafficking, now emerged as a crucial informant willing to testify against powerful figures long shielded from justice. Her testimony provided the missing links needed to connect disparate elements of the syndicate: names, dates, coded messages, and details of covert shipments. Ivana's transformation from victim to advocate inspired many, but it also intensified threats against her life and those close to her. Anna coordinated protective measures, aware that securing Ivana's safety was paramount not just for the case, but for the message it sent to others trapped in silence. As the investigation expanded, it revealed a chilling alliance. The syndicate had forged ties with extremist groups exploiting the refugee crisis, funneling weapons and forged documents to militants under the guise of humanitarian aid. This convergence of crime and terror deepened the complexity of the case and drew international attention. Agencies from neighboring countries and global organizations joined forces, but their coordination was hampered by political rivalries and competing interests. Anna's role evolved from detective to liaison, mediating between factions while continuing to lead the charge on the ground. Each piece of intelligence gathered was a step closer to unraveling a network that threatened not only Croatia's security but regional stability. The climax of this phase approached with a meticulously planned operation targeting a secret rendezvous on the Istrian Peninsula, where a massive shipment of arms was scheduled to exchange hands. Anna's team, bolstered by special forces and international operatives, prepared for a high-stakes confrontation. Under the cover of darkness, they moved silently through the dense forest surrounding the site, tension thick in the cool night air. The ensuing raid was swift and brutal. Gunfire cracked, shouts echoed, and shadows danced between trees as suspects were apprehended and caches seized. Among those arrested were key players previously thought untouchable, including a high-ranking official implicated by the evidence Ivana had helped uncover. The victory was hard-earned and bittersweet, highlighting both the progress made and the daunting challenges ahead. Standing amidst the wreckage of the operation, Anna reflected on the road traveled. The fight against entrenched crime was a long and winding one, filled with danger, sacrifice, and fleeting moments of triumph. Yet, in the faces of her team and the resilience of citizens rising against corruption, she found renewed hope. The battle for Croatia's soul was far from over, but the cracks in the criminal empire were growing wider. Anna Marek's journey was emblematic of a larger struggle, one that demanded courage, vigilance, and an unshakable belief in justice. As dawn broke over the Adriatic, she knew that whatever darkness lay ahead, the light of determination and truth would continue to guide her path. Let's jump to next story. Story 3. The night air in Zagreb was thick with an unsettling quiet, a deceptive calm that lingered above the cobblestone streets and historic facades. Beneath the surface of the city's picturesque charm, a sinister undercurrent flowed, one woven with secrets, betrayal, and shadows darker than the night itself. Detective Petra Novak had spent years navigating the fragile boundary between order and chaos in Croatia's capital, but nothing had prepared her for the complexity of the case that had landed on her desk that autumn evening. A string of high-profile kidnappings had shaken the city to its core, victims disappearing without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic notes and haunting silence. The victims were not random. They were prominent figures from politics, business, and culture, all connected by a single thread that Petra was determined to unravel. Her investigation began with the abduction of Marko Jovanovic, a charismatic tech entrepreneur whose company had recently launched a groundbreaking cybersecurity platform. At first glance, the motive seemed clear: ransom or corporate espionage. But as Petra delved deeper, the narrative twisted into something far more tangled and dangerous. The kidnappings were part of a broader scheme, a shadow war fought in the alleys of power and influence, where money, information, and lives were commodities to be traded. Every lead Petra pursued brought her closer to a hidden world of clandestine meetings in upscale cafes and underground clubs, where whispers of corruption intertwined with the scent of expensive cigars and expensive wines. This was a Croatia far removed from the one tourists admired, a nation still wrestling with its post-war scars and the corrosive influence of organized crime networks that had evolved to exploit the new digital era. The complexity of the case demanded every ounce of Petra's skill and resolve. She assembled a small, trusted team, a mixture of seasoned detectives, a brilliant but unconventional hacker named Luka, and an insightful profiler, Ivana, who had a knack for seeing the human patterns beneath the chaos. Together, they combed through mountains of data, surveillance footage, and intercepted communications, seeking the faintest glimmer of a pattern. Luka's expertise revealed encrypted messages hidden within the digital footprints left by the kidnappers, messages that hinted at a criminal enterprise operating not only within Croatia, but extending its reach across European borders. The syndicate had adapted to the new age, combining brute force with cyber tactics, making it harder to predict their moves or anticipate their next victim. While Petra worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle, the pressure from above mounted. Politicians demanded swift results, the media clamored for answers, and public fear rippled through the city like wildfire. Yet Petra understood that haste could be fatal. Rushing into action without full knowledge risked endangering the hostages and losing crucial evidence. Every moment was a delicate balancing act between urgency and caution. Her nights blurred into days as she chased shadowy figures through Zagreb's labyrinthine streets and shadowy districts, always aware that she was being watched. Threats arrived in veiled forms. Anonymous calls, ominous notes slipped under her door, and once, a car's brakes suddenly failed while she was driving alone. It was clear the kidnappers wanted her to back off, but Petra's determination only hardened. Amid the darkness of the investigation, Petra found an unexpected source of insight in the form of Ivana, the profiler. Ivana's ability to reconstruct the kidnappers' psychological profiles from scant clues was invaluable, revealing a pattern of methodical cruelty and manipulation. The syndicate was not just seeking money. They were sending messages, leveraging fear and control to bend the city's elite to their will. The victims' families were pawns in a larger game, and Petra's mission became not only to rescue them, but to dismantle the network that thrived on their suffering. One chilling revelation was the kidnappers' use of social media and public broadcasts to amplify terror, forcing authorities into impossible decisions. It was a war fought in the open, but with weapons invisible to the naked eye. As the investigation progressed, a breakthrough emerged when Luka decrypted a series of messages revealing a planned exchange of a high-value hostage in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Zagreb. The team prepared meticulously for the operation, coordinating with tactical units, and ensuring every possible scenario was accounted for. The night of the raid was tense beyond measure, silence hanging heavy like a shroud as they approached the decrepit building cloaked in shadows. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and stale fear. The kidnappers, confident in their fortress, were caught off guard by the precision and timing of the strike. Shots rang out, commands shouted in a mix of Croatian and English, and chaos erupted in the narrow corridors. The rescue was successful, but the aftermath was sobering. The captured kidnappers offered only fragmented information, revealing the syndicate's structure but guarding its kingpins zealously. Petra knew the battle was far from over. The arrests disrupted operations but left the core leadership intact, hinting at deeper layers of influence and corruption. Her mind raced with the implications. The kidnappings were symptoms of a broader sickness infecting the city and country, one that would not be eradicated with a single raid. As dawn broke over Zagreb, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Petra vowed to continue the fight, driven by a fierce sense of justice and the hope that one day, the city's shadows would finally recede. The morning after the raid brought no respite for Petra Novak. As sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds of her cramped office, she sifted through the interrogation transcripts, piecing together the fragmented puzzle left by the captured kidnappers. Their defiant silence masked the vast reach of the syndicate they served, an organization with tendrils embedded deeply in Croatia's underworld and beyond its borders. The more she learned, the more it became clear this was not just a local criminal enterprise. It was a multinational web of corruption, trafficking, and blackmail that had managed to operate beneath the eyes of law enforcement for years. The kidnappings were merely the syndicate's bluntest instrument, wielded to intimidate rivals and coerce the powerful into complicity. Petra's sleepless nights multiplied as she struggled to map the network's hierarchy, each name and location revealing another layer of shadowy influence that extended into political offices, corporate boardrooms, and even international intelligence circles. While the official investigation continued, Petra found herself increasingly isolated. The pressure from political leaders was relentless, their demands for quick, clean resolutions clashing with the slow, painstaking nature of detective work. Media outlets seized upon every leak, some orchestrated by unknown forces to muddy the waters and distract from the syndicate's true intentions. Rumors spread like wildfire, implicating innocent parties and eroding public trust. Amid this turbulence, Petra had to navigate a treacherous landscape where allies were few, and betrayal lurked around every corner. Her trusted team stood firm, but even they felt the weight of the growing danger. Luca's skills with digital forensics uncovered new leads. Encrypted communications hinting at offshore accounts and secret meetings in European cities like Vienna and Budapest. Yet each revelation only deepened the complexity of the case. The syndicate's reach was global, and they had adapted quickly to the digital age, using sophisticated encryption and dark web channels that required a blend of old-fashioned detective work and cutting-edge technology to penetrate. One particularly chilling discovery came from Ivana's profiling sessions with a recently captured foot soldier. The man, barely 25, exhibited signs of being deeply indoctrinated, a product of both poverty and manipulation. He spoke of the cause and loyalty to leaders who promised power and wealth in exchange for obedience and violence. It was clear the syndicate recruited from vulnerable populations, grooming new generations of criminals who believed they were part of a larger revolution against the system. This ideological veneer masked brutal pragmatism. The kidnappings were as much about maintaining control over these young recruits as they were about extortion. Ivana's insights gave Petra a new perspective on the human cost of the syndicate's operations and underscored the urgency of dismantling it before it could grow stronger and more entrenched. As the weeks turned into months, Petra's investigation took her across borders and into dark corners of Europe. Working with international agencies, she followed the money trails and intercepted communications that led to clandestine meetings in luxury hotels and hidden safe houses. She uncovered links to illicit arms dealers in the Balkans and drug traffickers operating along the Adriatic coast. The syndicate's influence was like a cancer, spreading through the veins of Europe's underworld and corrupting institutions meant to uphold justice. Yet despite the magnitude of the operation, Petra's determination never wavered. She refused to accept that the criminal empire was invincible. Every new arrest, every piece of evidence brought to light was a small victory, a chink in the armor of a seemingly unstoppable force. But the deeper Petra delved, the more personal the stakes became. Threats escalated from cryptic warnings to direct attacks. One night, as she returned to her apartment, a black SUV trailed her for several blocks before disappearing into the night. Her team's communications were hacked repeatedly, and confidential files vanished from their servers. Yet these attempts to intimidate only fueled Petra's resolve. She knew that behind the violence and deceit was a fragile network of fear, and if she could strike at its heart, she might finally bring the syndicate to justice. The turning point came when Luca decrypted a series of messages revealing an upcoming summit of the syndicate's top leaders, planned to be held in an isolated villa on the Dalmatian coast. It was an opportunity Petra could not miss. The operation was meticulously planned. Petra coordinated with Croatian special forces and Europol agents, preparing to storm the villa and capture the elusive kingpins. The villa, a sprawling estate perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the Adriatic Sea, was guarded by armed men and sophisticated surveillance systems. The assault had to be swift and precise to prevent the leaders from escaping or destroying vital evidence. As dawn broke over the azure waters, helicopters hovered above while ground teams encircled the property. The raid was intense, marked by gunfire echoing against the rocky cliffs and tense confrontations in the shadowed corridors of the villa. Petra led from the front, her presence a beacon of defiance against the criminals who had haunted the city for years. When the dust settled, several high-ranking members were apprehended, including the syndicate's enigmatic leader, known only as Crave, a figure shrouded in mystery and rumored to have ties to powerful figures beyond Croatia's borders. The arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, signaling a critical blow to the syndicate's operations. Yet Petra knew the victory was bittersweet. The network was resilient, and its roots had spread too deep for a single operation to eradicate. The fight against corruption, organized crime, and exploitation was ongoing, a relentless battle that demanded vigilance and courage. Back in Zagreb, as Petra watched the sun set over the city's historic skyline, she felt the weight of the victory and the cost it exacted. Families of the victims began to heal, but scars remained, testaments to the darkness that had once engulfed their lives. For Petra, the case was a reminder that justice was not a destination but a journey, one marked by sacrifice and unyielding hope. And as the night settled once again over Croatia's capital, she prepared herself for the next chapter, ready to face whatever shadows awaited, armed with the truth and an unbreakable will to protect the city she called home. Let's jump to next story. Story 4. In the dimly lit backstreets of Zagreb, where the shadows seemed to cling tighter than anywhere else in the city, Detective Marko Vukovic stood silently by the cracked pavement, watching the evening mist curl around the edges of the old stone buildings. It was late October of 2015, and the chill in the air hinted at the coming winter, yet the city's pulse throbbed with a restless energy born not just from the cold, but from a growing wave of unrest beneath its historic facade. Marko had been tracking a series of disappearances over the past few months, young men, mostly, vanishing without a trace. Official reports dismissed them as runaways or minor criminal escapades, but Marko knew better. His gut told him these were connected to something far more sinister, a hidden underworld that preyed on the vulnerable while cloaked behind layers of silence and fear. His investigation had brought him to this forgotten alleyway near the old market district, where whispers of an illicit trafficking ring had been circulating among the city's lower echelons. The victims were often found days or weeks later in decrepit warehouses or abandoned buildings on the outskirts, but the trail was cold, marked only by fragments of evidence, scraps of fabric, faint bloodstains, and sometimes a hastily discarded cell phone showing cryptic messages before shutting down permanently. Marko's mind raced as he recalled the grim patterns, the chilling similarities that linked each case. He knew the syndicate responsible was organized, ruthless, and operated with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Every move they made was calculated to avoid detection, exploiting the cracks in the city's law enforcement and political system. That night, Marko received a call from Anna, his longtime informant embedded deep within the city's underbelly. Her voice was tense, edged with urgency. "Marko, they're planning something big. I overheard them talking at the docks, a shipment coming in next week, and they're using the old abandoned shipyard as a drop point. This could be the break you've been waiting for." Her information was both a beacon of hope and a warning. The docks were notorious for being a no-go zone after dark, patrolled by guards who answered only to the highest bidder. Marko knew this operation would require more than just his instincts. It needed the full weight of the police task force and the cooperation of international agencies, given the syndicate's suspected ties beyond Croatian borders. Meanwhile, the political climate added layers of complexity to his work. Croatia had only recently joined the European Union, and with the promise of new beginnings came intense scrutiny and pressure to show progress in combating organized crime. Government officials were eager for quick results, often pushing for public victories rather than thorough, sustained investigations. Marko found himself navigating a maze of bureaucratic obstacles, balancing the demands of his superiors with the needs of justice. The syndicate, sensing the shifting tides, had grown bolder, their actions more brazen. Nighttime kidnappings escalated, and the city's residents whispered in hushed tones about the rising danger lurking in once safe neighborhoods. Back at the police station, Marko convened a meeting with his closest allies. Ivana, the forensic expert whose meticulous attention to detail had cracked many cases before. Luka, a cybercrime specialist with a knack for decrypting coded messages. And Petra, an undercover agent fluent in multiple languages who had infiltrated several criminal rings. Together, they formed a formidable team, united by a shared commitment to dismantle the syndicate no matter the cost. As they pored over maps, intercepted phone records, and surveillance footage, a clearer picture began to emerge. The syndicate's operations were sprawling, involving smuggling, extortion, and human trafficking, a network that fed off fear and corruption, thriving in the shadows where the law dared not reach. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Marko's team coordinated with Europol and Interpol, sharing intelligence and strategizing on how to intercept the upcoming shipment. Every detail mattered, from timing the raid to anticipating the syndicate's moves. Marko himself felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This was more than just a case. It was a battle for the soul of the city. Late into the nights, he reviewed dossiers and coordinated logistics, barely pausing to eat or rest. The lines between right and wrong blurred in the endless pursuit of justice, and he grappled with the knowledge that the innocents caught in the crossfire were the true victims. Then came the night of the operation. Under a moonless sky, the task force moved stealthily toward the abandoned shipyard, the salty sea air mingling with the metallic scent of rusted containers and oil spills. Marco's heart pounded as he took his position, the flashing red and blue lights of police vehicles hidden behind stacks of crates. The tension was palpable. One wrong move could cost lives. Suddenly, shadows flickered, figures moving with practiced ease, armed and alert. The raid erupted in a cacophony of shouts and gunfire, echoing across the empty docks. Marco led his team through the maze of containers, calling out commands and providing cover. Amidst the chaos, cries for help pierced the night. Hostages hidden in cramped spaces, their faces etched with fear and relief as they were freed. By dawn, the operation was declared a success. Several high-ranking members of the syndicate were captured, and dozens of victims rescued from a fate that would have otherwise been sealed in darkness. Yet, even as the city breathed a collective sigh of relief, Marco knew this was but one victory in a long war. The syndicate's roots were deep, and its reach extended far beyond Croatia's borders. As the first light of morning bathed Zagreb's ancient rooftops, Marco vowed to continue the fight, to expose every shadow and bring every criminal to justice. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice, but for Marco, there was no turning back. The city needed a protector, and he would be that guardian, silent, steadfast, and relentless. The aftermath of the raid left the city abuzz with mixed emotions. News outlets hailed the police for their decisive action, while survivors struggled to piece their lives back together amid the trauma. Marco visited the temporary shelter set up for the rescued victims, a cold warehouse converted into a refuge where social workers and psychologists offered support. The faces he saw were etched with exhaustion and disbelief, but also a flicker of hope, a fragile spark after the darkness they had endured. One young woman, Anna, clung to Marco's arm, her voice trembling as she recounted the horrors she had witnessed. Her story was a stark reminder of the human cost hidden beneath the headlines, fueling Marco's determination to dismantle the syndicate's entire network, not just the operatives caught in this single raid. Behind the scenes, the political repercussions of the operation rippled through the corridors of power. The government faced pressure to maintain momentum, but also scrutiny from factions wary of exposing too much. Corruption was a pervasive shadow over the city, and whispers suggested that some officials had ties to the syndicate, complicating the pursuit of justice. Marco found himself entangled in a web of intrigue, balancing the demands of his superiors with the urgent need to protect his team and the witnesses who now faced threats from remnants of the criminal network. Trust was a rare commodity in these times, and Marco learned quickly that every alliance had a cost. In the weeks that followed, the city's streets seemed quieter, but Marco knew the calm was deceptive. The syndicate was regrouping, adapting to the blow it had suffered. His team worked tirelessly, analyzing new intelligence that hinted at an even larger operation in the works, this time involving international smuggling routes that spanned from the Balkans to Western Europe. The complexity of the case grew, requiring coordination with foreign agencies and undercover agents operating in the shadows across multiple countries. Marco's resolve was tested as he navigated diplomatic tensions, bureaucratic red tape, and the ever-present danger lurking in the city's underbelly. One night, as Marco reviewed files in his dim office, a mysterious package arrived, a simple envelope with no return address. Inside, he found a series of photographs, grainy images of meetings between known syndicate leaders and prominent businessmen, some with ties to the government. The implications were staggering. This was the proof Marco needed to expose the corruption shielding the criminals, but it also put him directly in their crosshairs. Paranoia crept in, shadows lengthened, and every glance over his shoulder sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. His phone buzzed constantly with warnings and coded messages, some from allies, others from those wishing to silence him. Despite the danger, Marco pressed on, driven by a fierce sense of duty. He convened a clandestine meeting with trusted colleagues, laying bare the extent of the conspiracy. Plans were made to leak the evidence strategically, to rally public support and pressure authorities into action. It was a dangerous game, balancing the risk of exposure against the need for transparency. The city held its breath as the scandal unfolded, top officials resigning or being arrested, and the syndicate's influence weakened, but far from destroyed. Marco knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, a relentless battle against an enemy that thrived in the shadows. As winter deepened over Zagreb, Marco found solace only in fleeting moments, quiet walks along the snow-dusted streets, the distant hum of the city lights, and the hope reflected in the eyes of those he had saved. The scars left by the criminal underworld were deep, but so was the resilience of the people who refused to be broken. Marco's story was one of courage and sacrifice, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who stand against darkness. Though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, he remained steadfast, a guardian watching over the city's fragile peace, ready to face whatever shadows the future might bring. Let's jump to next story. Story 5. The sultry summer heat of Zagreb in 2013 hung heavily over the city, wrapping its ancient streets and Baroque buildings in a haze that blurred the lines between day and night. The rhythm of everyday life continued. Cafes spilled laughter onto cobblestones, trams clattered through intersections, and the scent of roasted chestnuts mixed with exhaust fumes. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a darker current pulsed through the city's underbelly. Crime had been rising, subtle but insidious, infiltrating neighborhoods and twisting the very fabric of trust. For Detective Luka Radic, the new chief of Zagreb's organized crime unit, the pressure to untangle this web fell squarely on his shoulders. Luka was a man of contradictions, tall and lean with sharp, calculating eyes that missed little, yet burdened with a world-weariness that came from years spent navigating the murky gray zones between justice and survival. He had returned from a stint in the capital, drawn back by a personal vow to clean up the city he loved and haunted by memories of his younger brother, who had vanished under suspicious circumstances years ago. The disappearance had never been solved, but Luka suspected it was tied to the growing criminal networks weaving their influence into Zagreb's politics and business. This case, an enigmatic series of disappearances involving young women from the outskirts of the city, was different. It felt personal. The investigation began with the discovery of a battered body in a rundown industrial district near the Sava River. The victim was a local university student, barely 20, with no known enemies or criminal ties. The brutality of the crime scene sent a chill through the police force, and public outcry demanded swift action. But Luka sensed something deeper beneath the surface. The victim was a single thread in a much larger tapestry of corruption, trafficking, and silent complicity. His team, a small cadre of trusted officers and forensic experts, delved into the grim details, each clue peeling back layers of deception. Their inquiries led them to a shadowy syndicate operating in the city, involved in smuggling, extortion, and human trafficking, protected by layers of bribery and intimidation. As the days dragged on, Luka found himself navigating a labyrinth of conflicting loyalties. Local politicians issued bland reassurances, but avoided direct confrontation with the criminals. Journalists sniffed around, eager for headlines but wary of crossing dangerous lines. And some of Luka's own colleagues, though loyal, were wary of how far they should push against an enemy that might reach into their own ranks. The pressure was relentless, and Luka's nights were haunted by dreams of his lost brother, mingled with the faces of the victims whose stories demanded justice. His resolve hardened. He would dismantle this network, no matter the cost. One of the breakthrough moments came when Luka's informant, a low-level smuggler named Dario, offered a lead on the syndicate's operations. Meeting in a dimly lit back room of a cafe, Dario revealed a chilling glimpse of the criminal machine. Shipments arriving under cover of darkness, safe houses scattered throughout the city, and influential men pulling strings from behind polished office doors. Dario's information was a double-edged sword, valuable but dangerous. Luka knew that any misstep could cost lives, including his own team's. Trust was scarce, and paranoia thickened the air. Meanwhile, the syndicate struck back with increasing boldness. Attempts were made to sabotage the investigation. Evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted, and a trusted officer was found dead in what was hastily ruled a suicide. Luka refused to accept the official narrative. Every death, every silence, deepened his conviction that corruption had poisoned the entire system. He pushed harder, working long hours, coordinating with international agencies who were beginning to take notice of Zagreb's growing crime problem. It was a race against time. Each new victim was a reminder of the stakes involved. In the midst of the chaos, Luka's personal life unraveled. His marriage, already strained by years of his obsession with work, fell apart. Late-night calls, missed anniversaries, and the constant weight of danger created an unbridgeable gap between him and his wife. Yet in his solitude, Luca found clarity. His mission was no longer just professional, it was profoundly personal. The missing girls, the dead officers, the corrupt officials, all were part of a system that had swallowed his brother whole. He was fighting not only to bring criminals to justice, but to reclaim the city's soul. The climax approached when Luca received an anonymous tip pointing to a warehouse on the city's outskirts, a known front for illicit activity. With a small tactical team, Luca planned a raid that could finally expose the syndicate's leadership. The night of the operation was tense, every step through the shadowed streets charged with the knowledge that failure could mean catastrophe. As they breached the warehouse, the sounds of confrontation echoed, a mix of shouting, gunfire, and desperate fleeing. Inside, the team uncovered evidence of trafficking operations, binders filled with names and dates, and encrypted files hinting at a network spanning borders. But the victory was bittersweet. The syndicate's kingpin escaped in the chaos, slipping through the cracks as sirens wailed and the city awoke to the news of the raid. Luca knew the battle was far from over. Yet the raid had broken the syndicate's grip on Zagreb, emboldening law enforcement and civil society alike. More than that, it had revealed the depth of the corruption that must be uprooted to restore order. Luca vowed to continue the fight, haunted but undeterred, driven by a hope that someday justice would prevail in a city scarred but not broken. The days following the warehouse raid were filled with a tense mixture of relief and unease. The public hailed the police's success, yet behind closed doors, Luca Radic wrestled with the elusive nature of his adversaries. The kingpin's escape was a bitter pill, a reminder that the criminal network was not just a collection of hardened thugs, but a sophisticated machine intertwined with legitimate power structures. Investigations revealed the syndicate's reach extended beyond Zagreb, seeping into the economic arteries of Croatia's coastal cities and even into neighboring countries. This was no local gang. It was an organized entity capable of manipulating markets, silencing witnesses, and corrupting officials with chilling efficiency. Luca's team worked tirelessly, poring over seized documents and decrypting files recovered in the raid. The deeper they delved, the more they uncovered layers of complicity that chilled even the most seasoned officers. Some names were recognizable: businessmen known for their philanthropy and political donations, city officials whose smiles masked darker dealings, and foreign intermediaries who used Croatia as a transit point for smuggled goods and people. The complexity of the network revealed a new dimension of the criminal world, one where violence was a tool, but influence and infiltration were the true weapons. Each revelation added weight to Luca's mission, but also increased the danger surrounding it. Meanwhile, the city itself seemed to pulse with conflicting emotions. The shadow of fear was still present, especially in neighborhoods where disappearances had sown distrust and despair. Families of victims clung to hope, their anguish visible in tear-streaked faces and whispered rumors. NGOs and human rights groups amplified calls for accountability, staging vigils and demanding transparency. Yet the syndicate's remnants struck sporadically. Intimidation tactics, targeted threats, and sudden disappearances reminded everyone that the threat was far from over. Luca understood that to truly dismantle this criminal empire, he would have to expose and confront those hidden behind velvet curtains and polished facades. The political landscape grew turbulent as well. National and local politicians found themselves under increasing scrutiny, forced to reckon with accusations of corruption and negligence. Some sought to distance themselves from the scandal, issuing carefully worded denials and promising reforms. Others, however, attempted to weaponize the crisis for political gain, using the public's anger to shift alliances and consolidate power. Luca found himself caught in this maelstrom, navigating the treacherous waters between justice and politics. His integrity and loyalty were tested daily as he balanced cooperation with political figures and unwavering pursuit of the truth. Amidst this turmoil, Luca's personal demons resurfaced. The ghost of his missing brother lingered in every case, every lead, a haunting presence that refused to be ignored. He revisited old files, talked to old contacts, and scoured the city for clues that might finally unravel the mystery of his brother's fate. Friends warned him against obsession, but Luca knew that closure was the only way to break free from the past. The missing women's cases and his brother's disappearance were threads of the same tangled web, one that stretched far beyond what anyone could imagine. His solitary nights were spent piecing together fragments of memories and evidence, hoping to find the pattern hidden in the chaos. The turning point came unexpectedly. A former syndicate courier, gripped by guilt and fear, reached out to Luca with information that could expose the Kingpin's hideout and reveal key collaborators within the city's elite. Arranging a secret meeting in an abandoned building near the Sava, Luca and his closest officers listened as the man described a network of safe houses, money laundering fronts, and the Kingpin's next planned move: a large shipment of trafficked individuals destined for foreign markets. The courier's testimony was explosive, but Luca knew it was a dangerous gambit. If the syndicate discovered his betrayal, the courier's life would be forfeit. Protective custody was arranged, but trust was fragile, and Luca feared betrayal. The stakes escalated rapidly. Surveillance operations intensified, and covert raids targeted smaller cells linked to the syndicate. Each success uncovered new connections, but also provoked violent reprisals. One evening, Luca barely escaped an ambush near the city's old train station, a stark reminder that his enemies were watching, waiting for mistakes. The threat extended beyond him. His team became targets, and even his estranged family was not safe from intimidation. The line between public service and personal sacrifice blurred. Luca's resolve hardened, his sense of justice becoming as much a shield as a weapon. The climax of the renewed offensive came in a dramatic midnight raid on a luxury villa outside Zagreb, rumored to be the Kingpin's temporary refuge. The operation was meticulous, involving SWAT teams, intelligence operatives, and international law enforcement liaisons. As the tactical units breached the perimeter, gunfire erupted, an intense firefight that lit the night with flashes of violence. Amid the chaos, Luca pushed forward, driven by years of frustration and loss. Inside, they found not only weapons and contraband, but also evidence linking the Kingpin to high-profile corruption cases and international trafficking rings. Yet, once again, the Kingpin slipped through the fingers of justice, escaping through a hidden tunnel beneath the estate. Though his capture eluded them, the raid shattered the syndicate's perceived invincibility. Public confidence surged, and law enforcement agencies across the region coordinated efforts to pursue the fugitive. For Luca, the victory was partial but meaningful. It signaled a turning point, a crack in the criminal fortress that had long cast its shadow over Croatia. In the aftermath, Luca reflected on the journey, the lives lost, the battles fought in shadows, and the elusive nature of justice itself. The city of Zagreb had changed, scarred by the confrontation, but not defeated. Criminal networks were weakened but not eradicated, corruption exposed but still lurking. Luca understood that the fight would continue beyond headlines and raids. It was a marathon of endurance, vigilance, and hope. As dawn broke over the city's ancient rooftops, Luca stood at the river's edge, contemplating the fragile balance between darkness and light, knowing that one day, perhaps, peace might prevail. Let's jump to next story. Story 6. The rain had been relentless that spring evening in Zagreb, turning the narrow cobblestone streets slick and reflective beneath the flickering glow of ancient street lamps. In the heart of the city, where old meets new in a fragile dance, a shadow moved quickly and quietly, blending into the night like a ghost bound to secrets. Marko Pavic was no stranger to these streets. A former police detective turned private investigator, haunted by a past case that had shattered his faith in justice. But tonight, his footsteps echoed with renewed purpose, as whispers of a new criminal syndicate rising from the ruins of the Balkan Wars reached his ears. A syndicate that didn't just traffic weapons or drugs, but something far more sinister. Human lives trafficked and sold in a cruel network stretching from the Adriatic coast deep into the heart of Eastern Europe. Marko's investigation began with a single anonymous tip, a message scribbled on a damp piece of paper left at his office door. They take the innocent where no one looks. Find them before it's too late. It was vague but urgent, the kind of message that set the gears in his mind turning. Croatia was still recovering from its violent past, struggling with corruption and the rise of shadow economies that exploited the vulnerable. The promise of peace was fragile, and criminal enterprises had found fertile ground in the gaps left by weak institutions and unresolved trauma. Marko knew that beneath the surface of the city's historic beauty lurked a darkness few dared to confront. He started by revisiting old contacts in the police force, those few honest officers still willing to push against the tide of complicity. The leads were sparse and often contradictory, but patterns began to emerge. Missing persons reports dismissed as runaways, sudden disappearances along the Dalmatian coast, and a growing number of whispers about trafficking routes connected to Zagreb's port. The syndicate appeared to operate with a ruthless efficiency, protected by layers of silence and fear. Marco's investigation brought him into contact with survivors who spoke in broken fragments of memory. The nights they were taken, the chains that bound them, and the faces of men who promised safety but delivered torment. Each testimony was a hammer blow to Marco's resolve, driving him deeper into the shadowy underworld. The city's police chief, a man caught between political pressures and his own conscience, reluctantly gave Marco limited access to official files, a rare sign of cooperation. Yet, even within the force, there were those who opposed his involvement, fearing that exposure of the syndicate would unravel more than just criminal enterprises. It could implicate powerful figures with vested interests in maintaining the status quo. Marco's every move was watched. Threats came in whispered phone calls and anonymous letters, warning him to stop digging or face consequences. But the fire within him, fueled by a personal loss years ago, the disappearance of his younger sister during the chaos of the war, refused to be extinguished. As weeks turned into months, Marco pieced together a chilling map of exploitation. The syndicate was more than a local gang. It was an international network that smuggled people across borders under the guise of legitimate businesses, shipping containers disguised as cargo, false documents, and corrupt officials facilitating the transit. Their victims were often women and children from rural areas in neighboring countries, lured by promises of work or a better life, only to be trapped in a nightmare of forced labor and sexual slavery. The economic disparity and post-war displacement had created a pool of desperate souls ripe for exploitation, and the syndicate's cruelty was matched only by its cunning. One evening, Marco received an encrypted message from an unknown source claiming to have inside information on the syndicate's next move. A shipment scheduled to arrive at the port of Rijeka, concealed in a container marked as agricultural produce. The source warned that the operation would be heavily guarded, and that any interference could result in violence. Marco knew this could be the break he needed, but also a trap designed to silence him forever. Still, the weight of the victim's silent pleas left no room for hesitation. Rallying a small group of trusted allies, including Ivana, a fierce journalist with a knack for uncovering corruption, and Dario, a former special forces operative with ties to the local police, Marco prepared for a covert operation that would test their resolve and skills to the limit. The night of the raid was thick with tension. Under cover of darkness and a brewing storm, the team infiltrated the port facilities, navigating through labyrinthine warehouses and shadowed docks. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and oil, mingled with the metallic tang of danger. They encountered armed guards, silent alarms, and the ever-present threat of discovery. Yet, as they reached the designated container and forced it open, the horrors inside became brutally real. Men, women, and children, gaunt and terrified, huddled in the cramped, suffocating space. The team worked quickly to secure the victims, calling for medical aid and protection. The rescue was a victory, but also a stark reminder of the scale of the problem. But the syndicate's leaders were nowhere to be found. The raid sent shockwaves through the criminal network, triggering a violent backlash. Marco's team faced constant harassment, car bombs, and ambushes meant to intimidate and dismantle their efforts. The city's fragile peace trembled as the syndicate retaliated with ruthless precision, targeting not just law enforcement but also journalists, activists, and anyone daring to challenge their dominion. Marco understood that this was not just a battle of fists and bullets, but of wills and ideals, a fight for the soul of a nation still healing from its scars. Amidst the chaos, Marco's personal demons loomed larger than ever. Memories of his sister's disappearance haunted his dreams, her face a ghostly presence urging him onward. The lines between his mission and his grief blurred, propelling him toward dangerous decisions. Trust became a rare commodity, with allies revealing hidden agendas and betrayal lurking in unexpected places. As he navigated a labyrinth of lies and half-truths, Marco realized that to bring down the syndicate, he would have to confront not only the criminals, but also the systemic rot that enabled their reign, corruption, apathy, and the lingering shadows of war. The investigation drew international attention, forcing Croatian authorities to increase efforts against trafficking and corruption. Yet, progress was slow and fraught with setbacks. Marco knew that true justice would require more than arrests and headlines. It demanded systemic change and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. His quest was far from over, the path ahead dark and uncertain. But as dawn broke over Zagreb's skyline, stained with the hues of a new day, Marco stood ready to continue the fight, a lone sentinel in the city's restless night, determined to illuminate the darkness no matter the cost. The following weeks unfolded like a grim chess game, where every move Marco made was countered with calculated cruelty and deception. The syndicate had powerful allies embedded in government offices, law enforcement, and even the judiciary, their influence casting long shadows over every effort to expose them. Marco's phone calls were tapped, his meetings infiltrated, and his closest confidants scrutinized for signs of betrayal. The pressure was suffocating, but with every act of intimidation, his resolve only hardened. His small team became a band of unlikely warriors. Ivana's fearless reporting stirred public awareness and outrage, while Dario's tactical expertise kept them one step ahead of their pursuers. Together, they navigated the murky underbelly of Zagreb's criminal world, balancing on the razor's edge between survival and sacrifice. One night, as Marco reviewed surveillance footage from a sting operation gone awry, a chilling realization struck him. The syndicate was planning something far more audacious than smuggling, a high-profile political assassination intended to silence a vocal reformist parliamentarian who had been spearheading anti-corruption legislation. The assassination would plunge Croatia into chaos, sending a clear message that no one was untouchable. The urgency of the situation consumed Marco. Protecting the parliamentarian meant intercepting the hitmen before they struck, but the syndicate's network was vast, their reach deep into the city's darkest corners. Marco and his team had to act quickly, knowing failure would cost countless lives and further entrench the criminal grip on the nation. The night of the planned attack was a tempestuous one, the city buffeted by cold winds and drizzling rain that blurred the edges of streetlights and shadows alike. Marco's team positioned themselves strategically near the parliamentarian's residence, each member concealed but alert, their breaths visible in the chilly air. Hours stretched like days as they waited for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a black SUV crept down the narrow street, its headlights off, the engine barely a whisper. Marco's heart pounded as the vehicle halted a few yards from the house. The hitmen emerged silently, faces obscured by dark masks, weapons drawn. A tense standoff ensued, but thanks to a covert signal from Ivana, the police were already en route to the scene. The ambush was thwarted, the assassins apprehended, and the parliamentarian spared. The syndicate had been dealt a blow, but it was clear this was only the beginning. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Media outlets seized on the story, exposing the extent of corruption and criminality that had been festering beneath Croatia's polished exterior. Public outrage swelled, protests erupted in Zagreb's main square, and calls for reform echoed through the streets. Marco found himself at the epicenter of a seismic shift, a reluctant hero burdened with the weight of expectation. Yet the victory was bittersweet. The syndicate's retaliation was brutal. Ivana was kidnapped and held hostage, a cruel reminder that the fight was far from over. The news hit Marco like a thunderclap, and he plunged into a desperate search to save her, navigating a treacherous maze of informants, criminals, and corrupt officials. Ivana's captivity unveiled the depths of the syndicate's depravity. Confined in a dilapidated warehouse on the city's outskirts, she endured psychological torment meant to break her spirit. But Ivana's will was unyielding. Using her sharp mind and calm demeanor, she managed to subtly communicate her location through coded messages sent during forced phone calls, keeping hope alive for her rescue. Marco, fueled by a blend of rage and determination, orchestrated a daring raid with Dario and trusted allies. The operation was fraught with peril. Gunfire erupted in the rain-soaked night, and shadows danced between crumbling walls as the team fought to reach her. When Ivana was finally freed, battered but alive, the sense of triumph was tempered by the harsh reality that the syndicate would not rest until their grip was broken or all who opposed them were silenced. The months that followed saw a wave of arrests, court cases, and slowly, reforms aimed at dismantling the criminal infrastructure. Marco's relentless pursuit of justice revealed a labyrinth of corruption implicating high-ranking officials and business magnates, shaking the foundations of Croatia's political landscape. But for every victory there were setbacks, allies betrayed, evidence mysteriously disappeared, and those convicted were often replaced by new, equally ruthless figures. The fight was Sisyphean, a constant battle against a hydra of greed and power that refused to be vanquished. Yet Marco's belief in justice never wavered. He became a symbol of resilience, a man who had stared into the abyss and chosen to fight rather than flee. On a quiet autumn evening, months after the storm of the investigation, Marco stood at the edge of the city, overlooking the Sava River that flowed quietly beneath the twilight sky. The city was changing, not just in its skyline, but in the spirit of its people. The scars of the past were still visible, but so was a flicker of hope, a promise that light could emerge from darkness. Marco knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but as the cool breeze swept over him, carrying the scent of rain and possibility, he felt ready. The fight for justice was never over, but in the heart of Croatia, amidst its ancient stones and modern struggles, Marko Pavic would keep walking the line between shadows and light, a guardian of truth in a city that refused to surrender to silence. Let's jump to next story. Story 7. The city of Zagreb in 2010 wore an uneasy calm, as if the shadows creeping through its ancient cobblestone streets were carrying secrets too heavy for the daylight to bear. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and exhaust fumes, a mingling of the old and the new Croatia trying to find its footing in a world rapidly changing. Beneath the surface of its bustling cafes, tourist crowds, and political facades, a darker pulse thrummed, one that whispered of crime syndicates, hidden alliances, and long-buried grudges. It was in this tangled web that Luka Marin found himself ensnared, a seasoned detective whose cynicism had been carved out by years of chasing ghosts in the city's underbelly. The morning had begun like any other, with Luka nursing a bitter black coffee at a grimy diner near the main square, when a call shattered the fragile normalcy. A body had been found in the Sava River, and it was no ordinary drowning. The victim was identified as Petar Kovac, a low-level informant who had been dabbling too close to a powerful and elusive cartel known locally as the Black Circle. Petar's death was staged to look like an accident, but Luka could see the telltale signs of a message, bruises that suggested a struggle, a faint trace of poison, and the positioning of the body, almost ritualistic. His instincts screamed that this was a warning, meant to silence not only Petar but anyone who dared to expose the syndicate's expanding influence in Croatia's fragile post-war economy. Luka's investigation quickly pulled him deeper into a labyrinth of corruption, from shadowy dockyards where illicit goods slipped through customs unchecked, to the opulent but claustrophobic offices of businessmen, whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. Each lead he followed seemed to dissolve into smoke, thwarted by unseen hands that controlled the city's machinery like puppeteers. Luka's partner, Anna, was a fiery young detective with a sharp mind and a rebellious streak that often clashed with Luka's cautious approach. Together, they began peeling back layers of deceit, uncovering a network of money laundering, human trafficking, and arms smuggling that spread like a virus through the veins of Croatia's institutions. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous their work became. Phone lines were tapped, cars followed, and anonymous threats left on their desks and in their homes. But what unsettled Luka most was the realization that the enemy wasn't just in the shadows. It was embedded in the very structures sworn to protect the public. Trust was a scarce commodity, and every handshake carried the risk of betrayal. One night, while reviewing surveillance footage from a seedy bar known to be a hangout for syndicate members, Luka caught a glimpse of a familiar face, Milan Dragic, a once-respected politician now rumored to be the cartel's silent partner. The footage showed Milan meeting with a known arms dealer, their conversation tense and furtive. It was the break Luka had been waiting for, but exposing Milan meant going head-to-head with a man whose reach extended into the highest echelons of power. As Luka and Anna prepared their case, the pressure mounted exponentially. Late nights were filled with frantic phone calls, encrypted emails, and shadow meetings in forgotten alleys where trust was as fragile as the dim light that flickered overhead. The turning point came when Anna uncovered a ledger hidden inside a safe deposit box, detailed records of bribes, kickbacks, and illicit transactions linking Milan's office directly to the Black Circle. It was a damning piece of evidence, but getting it into the hands of the prosecutors was a perilous task. The cartel had eyes everywhere, and Luka knew that once this information went public, their lives would be on the line. The days that followed were a blur of coded messages, secret rendezvous, and the constant fear that the cartel was closing in. Then came the night that changed everything. Anna was ambushed on her way home, attacked by masked assailants who left her battered but alive, a brutal warning that the syndicate's patience had run out. Despite the danger, Anna's resolve only strengthened, her injuries a grim badge of honor in the fight against the corruption choking their city. Luka doubled down, coordinating with a small group of trusted allies within the police and judiciary who still believed in justice. Together, they planned a covert operation aimed at dismantling the cartel's core operations. The mission was high risk, One misstep could mean death or imprisonment. But failure was not an option. As the operation unfolded in the dead of night, Zagreb's streets seemed to hold their breath. Cars screeched to a halt, masked officers stormed hidden warehouses, and guns were drawn in the shadows where the city's darkest dealings were exposed to the harsh light of law enforcement. In the aftermath, arrests were made, and the media hailed it as a major victory against organized crime. Yet Luca knew the war was far from over. The cartel's roots ran deep, and for every leader taken down, another would rise in the void. Still, for the first time in years, there was a flicker of hope in Luca's heart. Hope that one day, the streets of Zagreb might be free from the suffocating grip of fear and corruption. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Luca stood on the riverbank, watching the current carry away the remnants of a dark chapter. The city was waking up, and so was the promise of justice. The days after the raid were filled with tense interrogations and a flurry of legal maneuvering. Luca found himself sitting across cold metal tables in dimly lit interrogation rooms, facing men who once seemed untouchable, drug lords, corrupt officials, and shadowy middlemen, now stripped of their veneer of power and forced to confront their own downfall. But the true challenge was navigating the murky waters of politics and media manipulation, where every word spoken could be twisted and every fact obscured. The public clamored for swift justice, yet behind closed doors, the cartel's remnants plotted their resurgence, fueled by vengeance and the loss of their leaders. Luca and Anna were no longer just detectives. They had become symbols of resistance, their every move scrutinized by enemies and allies alike. One morning, a tip arrived from an unexpected source. A former cartel lieutenant turned informant who called himself Marco. His voice was gravelly, laden with fear but edged with determination. He claimed to have crucial information about a hidden weapons cache and plans for a major shipment that could destabilize the fragile peace in the region. The catch was that Marco wanted immunity and protection in exchange for his cooperation. Luca wrestled with the decision. Trusting a man who had thrived in the criminal underworld was perilous, yet ignoring the lead could allow the cartel to regroup and strike back harder. After consulting with Anna and their trusted contacts, Luca decided to take the risk. The informant's intel set a new operation in motion, one that stretched from the industrial outskirts of Zagreb to the port city of Rijeka, a sprawling hub where smugglers disguised their deeds beneath the hum of maritime commerce. As Luca and his team mobilized, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation and dread. They coordinated with Coast Guard units and customs officers who had long battled corruption within their ranks. The night air was heavy with the scent of salt and diesel as patrol boats cut through the dark waters, searching for concealed containers. In warehouses shrouded by shadows, teams moved cautiously, knowing that the cartel's lookouts were everywhere, and any mistake could mean bloodshed. Hours passed in agonizing silence before a breakthrough. A cache of automatic rifles, explosives, and counterfeit documents was uncovered, enough to arm a small militia. The discovery sent ripples through the law enforcement community, a stark reminder of the cartel's ambitions and the precariousness of the peace they all sought to maintain. Back in Zagreb, the political fallout from the operation was immediate. Milan Dragic, once untouchable, faced mounting pressure as his connections to the cartel were exposed in court. The media frenzy painted him alternately as a mastermind and a pawn, feeding public fascination with corruption scandals. Yet beneath the headlines, Luca understood that dismantling a criminal empire was not a matter of public spectacle, but painstaking work. Digging through financial records, securing witness testimonies, and enduring endless delays and threats from defense lawyers skilled at exploiting legal loopholes. Meanwhile, Anna's recovery from her brutal attack progressed slowly, her resilience inspiring the team, but also underscoring the human cost of their battle. She returned to the force with a cautious optimism, her eyes sharper, her resolve tempered by pain but unbroken. The cartel's attempts to retaliate grew increasingly desperate and brazen. One evening, Luca's apartment was ransacked, documents torn and scattered, a clear message that no one was beyond their reach. The city's streets, once vibrant with life, sometimes felt like traps waiting to close. Yet Luca and Anna pressed forward, knowing that retreat was not an option if they were to protect the fragile hope kindling in Zagreb's heart. Their investigation revealed that the cartel was planning to expand into human trafficking networks, exploiting vulnerable refugees streaming through the Balkans in search of a better life. This revelation added urgency and moral weight to their mission, transforming it from a battle against crime into a fight for humanity itself. With the support of international law enforcement agencies and NGOs, Luca helped orchestrate raids on safe houses and transit points used by traffickers. Each operation was fraught with danger, with the risk of innocent lives caught in the crossfire. But it also uncovered stories of survival and courage that fueled the team's determination. Amidst the darkness, moments of humanity shone. Rescued victims reunited with families, corrupt officials arrested, and communities slowly reclaiming their streets. Yet, even as these victories mounted, Luca remained haunted by the knowledge that the cycle of crime was deeply entrenched, nurtured by poverty, political instability, and the scars of war. The fight was endless, but every step forward was a testament to resilience. As the year drew to a close, the city of Zagreb began to breathe more freely. The cartel's grip weakened, their leaders imprisoned or in hiding, their networks disrupted. Public trust in the police showed tentative signs of restoration, and the scars left by years of corruption and violence were slowly beginning to heal. Luca and Anna stood on the threshold of a new chapter, knowing that the war against crime was far from over, but proud of the ground they had gained. The city's ancient streets held their stories, the good, the bad, and the in-between, and Luca carried those stories with him, a reminder of why he fought to bring light to the darkest corners of his homeland. As snow began to dust the rooftops and the cold air whispered of a new year, Luca found a moment of quiet reflection. The city was his home, flawed and beautiful, and he would face whatever shadows came next with the same relentless resolve. The dawn of the new year brought little respite for Luca and his team. Despite the recent successes, the remnants of the cartel proved elusive, shifting like shadows beneath the surface of society, embedded in legitimate businesses, political offices, and even within the police force itself. Each breakthrough was met with another brick wall, each arrest shadowed by whispered threats and sudden disappearances. Luca understood the unspoken rules of this grim game. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became, not only for himself, but for everyone he cared about. Late nights at the precinct were now filled with strategic meetings to identify the mole who had leaked sensitive information that led to the disastrous ambush on one of their safe houses. Anna, back on duty but still physically and emotionally fragile, insisted on joining these sessions, her sharp intuition proving invaluable even as she battled her own demons. Meanwhile, the city of Zagreb was slowly becoming a battleground between old loyalties and new forces eager to capitalize on the cartel's fragmentation. Small-time gangs, hungry for power and territory, moved in aggressively, sparking violent turf wars that left innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. The delicate balance of power was teetering, and the once clear enemy blurred into a complex web of alliances and betrayals. Luca spent long hours analyzing intelligence reports, piecing together patterns from seemingly unrelated incidents. He found himself haunted by the faces of victims. A young mother caught in a drive-by shooting, a teenager lured into drug dealing, a local shop owner whose life was shattered by extortion. Each case was a thread in the fabric of corruption and crime, a testament to how deeply the cartel's influence had permeated everyday life. One particularly chilling discovery emerged from an anonymous tip, an underground fight ring operating beneath the city, where debts were settled through brutal matches and human lives were traded like currency. The fights were not just for sport, they were a means for criminal factions to recruit and coerce, turning desperate souls into expendable pawns. Luca and Anna, driven by a mixture of revulsion and duty, arranged a covert infiltration, recruiting an undercover officer skilled in the brutal world of street fighting. The operation was risky. One misstep could blow their cover and cost lives. As they descended into the underworld's darkest corners, the city's neon lights felt like a distant illusion, replaced by the harsh glare of reality where morality was blurred and survival was a daily gamble. In the midst of this chaos, a new adversary surfaced, a charismatic figure known only as the Viper, whose cunning and cruelty rivaled that of the cartel's former kingpins. The Viper's network was more sophisticated, using technology and social media to coordinate crimes and evade detection. Rumors swirled that he was once a tech prodigy turned rogue, using his skills to manipulate information and control digital currencies that funded his operations. The police cyber unit, overwhelmed and understaffed, struggled to keep pace. Luca realized that the battle had evolved beyond physical confrontations. It was now a war fought in encrypted messages, digital footprints, and shadowy virtual realms. To combat this, he liaised with international cybersecurity experts, forging uneasy alliances with global agencies also targeted by the Viper's schemes. The personal toll of the investigation weighed heavily on Luca. He found himself increasingly isolated, the constant danger fracturing relationships with family and friends. The long hours and sleepless nights blurred into an endless grind, his thoughts often returning to Anna, whose own trauma mirrored his, but whose strength remained a beacon. Their partnership became more than professional. It was a lifeline in a world where trust was scarce and betrayal lurked behind every door. They shared quiet moments between operations, where words were few but understanding ran deep. Yet, even as they leaned on each other, Luca was painfully aware that the lines between right and wrong were becoming dangerously thin. The legal system that once seemed inviolable now appeared fragile, susceptible to manipulation and corruption that even the best officers struggled to contain. Amid these struggles, an unexpected breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a former cartel accountant who had fled the country and was willing to testify in exchange for protection. His detailed ledgers revealed a sprawling network of money laundering operations disguised as legitimate businesses, extending from Croatia's Adriatic coast to neighboring countries. This financial web was the backbone supporting not only drug trafficking, but also arms smuggling and human exploitation rings. Armed with this knowledge, Luca orchestrated a series of raids targeting financial hubs and offshore accounts, striking a critical blow to the cartel's infrastructure. The operation was a logistical nightmare, requiring coordination across multiple jurisdictions and delicate negotiations with foreign authorities wary of political fallout. Despite these victories, the Viper's influence continued to grow, his public taunts on underground forums signaling that the police's hold was tenuous. He targeted key witnesses, sending chilling messages that hinted at a deeper conspiracy involving some of Croatia's elite. Luca was forced to confront uncomfortable truths, that the fight against crime was not just about catching criminals, but uprooting systemic corruption that shielded them. Each revelation brought him closer to a dangerous precipice, where exposing the truth could mean crossing powerful enemies who operated beyond the reach of the law. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if justice would prevail or if darkness would reclaim its dominion. In the final weeks of 2010, as Zagreb's streets glittered with holiday lights, Luca stood on the precipice of a new era. The battles fought had changed the city and its people in profound ways. Crime syndicates were fractured but not defeated. Justice had been served but at great cost. The fragile hope that had sparked in the wake of their efforts now flickered uncertainly against the coming storm. Luca knew that this was only the beginning of a long, arduous journey. A journey where every victory was hard-won and every loss left scars that time could never fully heal. Yet, beneath the weight of uncertainty, he found a resolute strength in the knowledge that the fight for Croatia's soul would endure, carried forward by those who dared to stand against the darkness. Let's jump to next story. Story 8. Croatia, 2012. The autumn rain fell in thin sheets over the gray cobblestones of Rijeka's old port district, softening the outlines of rusted shipping containers and casting a shroud of anonymity over the night's activities. The air smelled of brine and diesel, and every shadow seemed to pulse with potential danger. For Inspector Ivan Kovacevic, this wasn't just weather. It was a mood, a warning, a mirror of the tension that had been building for weeks. Since early September, a string of well-orchestrated heists had rocked Croatia's coastal cities, targeting high-value shipments in transit from the Balkans to Western Europe. Each strike had been methodical and bloodless, as though carried out by ghosts, leaving investigators chasing whispers through abandoned warehouses and shell companies. But tonight, Ivan had a lead, fragile and anonymous, but credible enough to drag him into the rain-soaked maze of Rijeka's industrial sprawl, armed with nothing but a sidearm, a fraying notepad, and the gnawing certainty that the corruption infecting the city ran deeper than any one case. The name that surfaced most often in coded messages and trembling informant statements was Marko Stanic, a former customs official who had vanished from the public eye after a quiet dismissal in 2009. Since then, Stanic had reinvented himself as a middleman, a facilitator for smugglers moving stolen goods, counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and occasionally people. No one had seen him in person for months, but Ivan's tip claimed he would be at Warehouse 17 that night, settling scores or sealing deals. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Ivan was there first, crouched in the shadow of a corroded crane, watching figures emerge from sleek black vehicles that had no business in such a derelict place. The faces were familiar, businessmen with criminal records sanitized by expensive lawyers, ex-military men turned contractors, a few foreign accents too polished for local crime, but too slick for diplomacy. This wasn't a gang, it was a syndicate, and it operated like a boardroom with silencers. Ivan's instincts, honed by years of watching men lie to their wives and lawyers before they lied to the state, told him this was bigger than smuggling. It was about infrastructure, ownership of docks, access to shipping manifests, bribed officials along the supply chain. Croatia's entry into the European Union was still a year away, but already the vultures were circling, preparing to exploit the transition with precision. This meeting was not a transaction. It was a declaration of war for control of the region's criminal logistics. Ivan scribbled notes feverishly, voice recorder hidden beneath his coat, aware that if he were spotted, no badge in the world would protect him from what these men would do. He recognized one man in particular, Dragan Ristic, a Montenegrin financier whose public persona as a maritime entrepreneur masked a trail of dead witnesses from Montenegro to Slovenia. If Ristic was here, the operation was already international, and worse, it meant intelligence had failed to track his movements. Ivan wasn't just watching a crime, he was watching a failure of national security in real time. But Ivan hadn't come alone. In a van parked several blocks away, his colleague Inspector Yelena Vukovic was monitoring the scene through a grainy drone feed, her fingers flying over the laptop keyboard as she recorded license plates and extracted facial matches from Europol's watch list. They communicated through discreet earpieces, their voices tense and clipped. "That's the Albanian courier," she whispered, "the one tied to the Prague shootings. And the guy in the blue jacket, Milan Peric, former naval officer, dishonorably discharged, now wanted in connection with a weapons cache in Zadar." Each identification deepened the complexity of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an alignment of rival interests under one umbrella, the birth of something calculated and lethal, a criminal confederation designed to survive law enforcement, jurisdictional loopholes, and political change. Suddenly the mood shifted. A single shout cracked the air, followed by the sharp percussion of automatic fire. Ivan ducked instinctively, heart slamming against his ribs as the gathering erupted into chaos. Someone had either been betrayed or had jumped the gun, literally. Silhouettes scattered between containers as muzzle flashes danced like fireworks in the dark. From his vantage point, Ivan saw two bodies drop and heard the screech of tires as one of the black sedans peeled away from the scene. Yelena's voice in his ear turned frantic. "You need to move now. They're splitting up." But Ivan didn't move. Not yet. Through the crosshatch of steel and rain, he caught a glimpse of Stanek himself, grayer, heavier, but unmistakable, dragging a silver briefcase as he fled toward the dockside, flanked by two gunmen. The ghosts had names now. Faces. Trajectories. Ivan made his move, cutting across the yard, slipping through shadows and debris. A dead man slumped against a barrel, one of Ristik's bodyguards, neck at an unnatural angle. The entire operation had imploded within minutes, and Ivan's only advantage was that the chaos provided cover. He pursued Stanek past a chain-link fence, his boots splashing through puddles, until he rounded a corner and was blinded by headlights. A van screeched to a halt just meters away, its side door sliding open. A masked figure inside raised a pistol, but didn't shoot. "Too late, cop," the voice growled, Balkan-accented but unnervingly calm. "You should have stayed in your precinct." The van peeled away before Ivan could raise his weapon. The briefcase was gone. So was Stanek. But not everything had vanished. Back at headquarters, Yelena was already compiling the footage and mapping the escape routes. The scene was a goldmine of forensic evidence, casings, blood trails, fingerprints, and most importantly, data. Devices had been dropped, signals had been pinged. Ivan knew they had enough to blow open the syndicate's outer shell, but the real challenge would be peeling back the layers. Every name they'd uncovered tonight had at least three more behind it, each protected by networks of silence, violence, and political insulation. The case had just grown exponentially, and Rijeka was only the entry point. The trail would now lead through border towns into Sarajevo, across to Vienna, perhaps even up to Berlin or down to Athens. The Balkan underworld was once fragmented. Tonight had proven it was evolving. Ivan sat down at his desk as the city began to stir under the pale light of dawn. Rain still drummed against the windows. His coat was soaked through, his gun holster stiff with water and sweat. But his mind was alight. They hadn't stopped the meeting, but they had seen it. That in itself was a victory. And in his notebook, stained with drizzle and scribbled in haste, were names that would echo through Interpol briefings and international task forces. Croatia's underworld had taken a bold step into the future, and Ivan would be waiting. The city was quiet the next evening, though not in the peaceful sense, more like a calm that feels like a bruise. Rijeka's industrial zone bore fresh scars. Blood scrubbed off concrete by municipal workers who didn't ask questions, security camera feeds erased from local businesses by men who weren't in uniform but flashed the right badges. Somewhere in that uneasy stillness, Inspector Ivan Kovacevic sat before a pinboard now bloated with photos, strings, maps, and timelines that reached across borders. Faces looked back at him, some known, others blurry from surveillance stills, each connected by arrows and notes that resembled the outline of a conspiracy, though it wasn't just theory anymore. What had begun as a whisper of smuggling had mutated into a full-blown international criminal architecture, complete with financiers, ex-military enforcers, cyber specialists, and deep links to a shadow economy that had its claws in everything from shipping manifests to customs offices. Yet for all the intelligence he had gathered, the man he needed most, Marko Stanic, had vanished again, swallowed into that same maze of back channels that had protected him for the past 3 years. The forensic teams had identified 7 confirmed attendees from the failed meeting. 2 dead, 1 critically wounded in a hospital under armed guard, and the rest dispersed. The wounded man, a Serb named Nenad Ilic, had remained unconscious, but his burner phone had not. Inside it were fragments of encrypted texts and a set of GPS coordinates leading to a nondescript warehouse near Osijek, close to the Hungarian border. It was a thin lead, but thin leads were better than silence. Ivan requested an immediate raid under the justification of illegal arms trafficking. He knew the paperwork would stall in Zagreb, bogged down by bureaucrats too cautious or too compromised. But that didn't matter. Yelena had already assembled an unofficial task team. 2 trusted agents from Dubrovnik, 1 ex-intelligence analyst who owed Ivan a favor, and a forensic pathologist from Split who had quietly funneled them morgue reports without going through the official chain of custody. The raid would happen, but it wouldn't be listed in any database. This was ghost work now, matching the specters they were chasing. Osijek's warehouse looked abandoned, but Ivan had seen enough fake facades to know better. Surveillance drones showed fresh tire tracks and heat signatures inconsistent with a dead building. At midnight they moved in. For vehicles, no sirens, just headlights cut and pistols drawn. The lock on the main gate was new. Inside they found evidence of occupation. Beds still warm, a half-eaten plate of food, satellite phones still charging. Whoever had been there had left no more than 30 minutes before. But what they did find, hidden behind a wall panel, was a steel cabinet filled with hard drives, backup ledgers, and a collection of passports from at least 8 different countries. Names like Arben Sula, Viktor Mihajlovic, and Emilia Marsetic. Real names? Fake? It didn't matter. Each was tagged with code numbers matching invoices for illicit shipments, some dated as far back as 2008. This was a treasure trove. Yelena's eyes lit up as she began scanning the files, bypassing weak encryptions. One folder, innocuously labeled Sundries, contained shipment lists cross-referenced with coastal port activity, including Rijeka, Split, and Plos. The goods weren't just guns or drugs. There were human organs, military-grade drones, and even high-value artworks presumed lost during the Balkan Wars. The syndicate's reach wasn't just deep. It was cultured, ruthless, and profitable beyond imagination. Then came the real shock. A scanned memo with a Ministry of Transport watermark. It referenced clearance for a shipment logged as agricultural equipment, heading to Trieste via Rijeka, signed off by a deputy minister whose name Ivan had only seen in the periphery of political corruption reports. The implications were explosive. The syndicate wasn't just evading government oversight, they had pieces of the government itself under their payroll. That level of protection explained how Stanic kept disappearing, how meetings happened without interference, and how any meaningful investigation kept collapsing before it reached court. Ivan felt the familiar chill of powerlessness, the recognition that he wasn't just fighting criminals. He was fighting an ecosystem built to survive accountability. His job hadn't just become dangerous, it had become obsolete in its current form. The documents were smuggled out of the Osijek site and distributed to trusted foreign liaisons. Interpol contacts in The Hague, a war crimes investigator in Sarajevo, and a Swiss anti-money laundering bureau that had previously flagged suspicious Croatian shell companies. But even as Ivan widened the net, he felt the noose tightening around his own neck. 3 days after the Osijek raid, he received an envelope at his apartment with no return address. Inside was a single photo, his daughter, Sarah, walking home from school. No note, no demand, just a reminder that the enemy had reached. Ivan didn't panic, he packed. Yelena arranged for Sarah to be flown to her aunt in Ljubljana under a false name. From this point forward, Ivan knew he was no longer just an investigator. He was a target. By the following week, 3 of the names from the Osijek list were found dead. One in a burned-out car near Banja Luka, one drowned in the Drava River, and one allegedly killed during a robbery in Belgrade. All of them had been loosely connected to the shipping logs from the briefcase Stanek had carried. It was clear now that someone was cleaning house. Ivan doubled back through every lead, every photo, every whispered confession from the past 6 months. The walls were closing in fast, and the window to stop this syndicate before it restructured under a new name was narrowing. And then, almost impossibly, they got a break. A confidential source, known only as Kosovo Jackal, a former mercenary turned informant, contacted Ivan through a burner channel, offering the location of the next planned meeting. This one wouldn't be in Croatia, but just over the border in a disused railway depot outside Vukovar. The source wanted immunity and 20,000 euros. Yelena argued it was a trap. Ivan didn't care. They couldn't wait for another meeting to end in blood and fire. This time, they would strike first. As the black van rolled out of Rijeka under a moonless sky, Ivan looked out at the coastline one last time. Somewhere out there, hidden in the folds of Croatia's fractured geography and wounded history, a criminal empire was reshaping itself for a global future. And somewhere, in the underbelly of that machine, Marko Stanek waited, untouched, still moving the gears. Ivan didn't know if he would live to see this through, but he knew one thing for certain. He would drag the truth out of the shadows, no matter how many monsters it exposed. Let's jump to next story. Story 9. Croatia, 2016. The rain came down over Split like a veil, blurring the neon signs of the harborfront bars and washing the stone alleys clean of the previous night's sins. Beneath the surface of the coastal city's tourist charm, something foul was brewing, something that smelled of old war secrets, new money, and blood not yet dried. Detective Andrej Vukovic knew the scent well. He had spent 15 years with the Croatian state police, navigating the thin line between justice and complicity in a country that had learned to bury truths beneath silence and bureaucracy. But this case was different. It had started with a single body pulled from the sea near Bacchus Beach, the hands bound in electrical wire, throat slit with surgical precision, and eyes wide open as if bearing witness to his own murder. The local press had called it a gang killing, one more statistic in a city increasingly used to whispers of Balkan trafficking. But Vukovic saw the signs, the careful disposal, the strange absence of blood on the clothes, the surgical tape found stuck to the corpse's ankle. This wasn't a street crime. This was a message, and he wasn't the only one who received it. The dead man had no ID, no digital trail, and no apparent past, but he had something even more dangerous. A tattoo on his collarbone that marked him as part of Kavari, the so-called Keepers, a clandestine post-war network believed to have splintered from Croatian paramilitary units after the conflict ended. Though the state never officially acknowledged their existence, there had been enough leaked documents, mysteriously shuttered investigations, and quiet assassinations to suggest that the Kavari weren't just real. They were still operational. Rumors had circulated for years that they functioned as a kind of nationalist underworld intelligence ring, handling everything from arms smuggling to political blackmail. If one of their own had washed ashore dead, someone had violated a pact that had survived since the 1990s. And Vukovic, for reasons he wasn't ready to admit even to himself, couldn't let this go unanswered. He began where he always did, with the coroner. Dr. Tahana Krilik had worked hundreds of cases with Vukovic, and she was the only one left in Split he trusted implicitly. Her report confirmed his suspicions. The body had been drained of blood post-mortem, likely to conceal forensic markers. There were traces of an anticoagulant used in illegal organ trafficking, as well as signs of prior surgery on the kidneys, one of which was now missing. This wasn't just a hit, this was industrial. Someone had taken the man apart like an asset, not a victim. The implications were staggering. If the Kavari were being harvested, then either they had lost control of their own rogue elements, or someone had declared open war on them. Either scenario meant violence was coming. Back at headquarters, Vukovic attempted to flag the case as a potential national security issue. Within hours, he was shut down. Files were reclassified, his access revoked. The commissioner called him into a private meeting and, with the kind of forced calm that reeked of political pressure, instructed him to drop the case. "Let the tide wash that one away," the man said, as if quoting from some ancient Balkan proverb. But Andrei had never been good at letting things go. That same night, he received a message on his personal burner phone, a number he hadn't used in nearly a decade. The message was simple: "If you keep digging, we're black." It wasn't a threat. It was advice from someone who knew exactly how this game was played. Unable to pursue the case through official channels, Vukovic turned to the only people left who might talk, the city's underworld. He reached out to Luka Goran Mestrovic, a mid-level fixer who operated out of a betting shop disguised as a laundromat. Luka had spent time in Bosnia running contraband fuel during the war and had contacts in Montenegro and Kosovo. Over rakića and cigarettes, Luka let slip that there had been chatter, an off-the-books shipment that arrived in Plos, rerouted under fake agricultural documentation, protected by military-grade encryption codes. Inside the containers, not weapons, people, bodies, or parts of them. Vukovic felt the weight of it settle in his chest like stone. This wasn't just organ trafficking, it was geopolitical. Croatia had become a quiet corridor for something monstrous, and Split was one of the gates. The name that surfaced next was one Vukovic hadn't heard in years, Milan Bilic. Once a decorated war hero turned nationalist politician, Bilic had vanished from public life around 2010 after a scandal involving missing EU reconstruction funds. Rumors had placed him in South America, then later in Montenegro, but never confirmed. Now, according to Luka's sources, Bilic was back, in Vis, of all places. The island had become a favored spot for reclusive millionaires and ex-operatives alike. Vukovic made arrangements. A fishing trawler owed him a favor, and by morning, he was quietly ferried across the Adriatic, armed only with a 9mm Glock, a flask of rakića, and a dossier that could get him killed in 3 countries. On the island, time moved differently. The air smelled of rosemary and salt, but beneath the postcard veneer was a silence too calculated to be innocent. It didn't take long for Vukovic to locate the villa rumored to be Bilic's safe house, an old Yugoslav-era fortress now outfitted with satellite dishes, armed guards, and a private dock. Getting inside would take more than a badge, it would take a betrayal. He found it in the form of Andila, a former army medic who now worked as Bilic's private nurse. She had lost a brother in the war and a husband to Bilic's cleansing operations in 1995. When Vukovic told her who the dead man in Split was, one of the Kavari turned against his master, punished and harvested, she didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow night," she whispered. "There's a shipment. He'll be in the control room. I'll leave the door open. After that, you're on your own." The next night, under a full moon, Andrei Vukovic climbed the cliffs of Vis with the quiet desperation of a man who knew there would be no backup, no press coverage, and no reward. He didn't care. This wasn't about protocol. This was about ghosts, his own and those who could no longer speak. When he reached the villa's south entrance, the door was unlocked, just as promised. Inside, the corridors echoed with the sterile hum of refrigeration units and security monitors. As he made his way to the control room, he saw them, rows of refrigerated crates, each labeled with coded numbers, biometric tags, and in one case, a Croatian Ministry of Health sticker. The truth was worse than any theory. The state wasn't infiltrated. It was involved. He reached the control room in time to see Bilic alone, sipping from a crystal glass, watching surveillance feeds. When he turned, there was no surprise on his face. Just a sad smile. "You should have stayed in Split, detective," he said. "But here you are. Another relic, clinging to laws written by cowards." Vukovic raised the gun. For a moment, silence ruled the room, thick with tension and the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken truths. The air conditioning unit buzzed in the background, blowing a sterile chill over the crates of organs waiting to be smuggled across the Adriatic, while the soft beep of surveillance monitors tracked every movement outside the villa. Vukovic's finger trembled slightly on the trigger, not out of fear, but because he knew this wasn't a clean shot. This wasn't a suspect to arrest or a criminal to drag through court. This was a man woven into the very fabric of post-war Croatia, someone who had built his empire in the spaces left behind by NATO airstrikes and UN resolutions. Killing Bilic here now, in this room filled with proof, would be justice of a kind, but it wouldn't stop the machinery grinding outside. Still, justice had to begin somewhere, and if that meant bleeding the rot from the root, so be it. "You killed him, didn't you?" Vukovic said, voice low. The man they found in Split. He was one of yours, someone who turned on you. Someone who saw this place, saw what you were doing. Billick didn't flinch. Instead, he took another sip of his drink, then carefully set the glass down on the polished mahogany console beside him. "No, Andre," he said softly. "You misunderstand. I didn't kill him. The system did. The same system you served, and still foolishly believe in. He got greedy. He tried to sell information to Brussels, files, names, operations. I couldn't have that. But I didn't slit his throat. That was someone else. Someone much closer to your own department." It hit like a slap, a sudden wave of nausea crashing over Vukovic as his mind reeled. Someone in his unit. A superior? Had he been walking through a minefield this whole time, thinking himself a hunter when he'd really been a pawn? "Who?" he asked. "Give me the name." But Billick only smiled, and the smile was infuriating. "Names don't matter anymore. Only roles. You played yours. He played his. And now we're at the curtain call." Then, without warning, Billick pressed a button on the console. An alarm blared to life, and red lights began to flash across the villa. Vukovic reacted instinctively, stepping forward and firing twice, once into the shoulder, once into the chest. Billick staggered back, gurgling, slumping against the wall as blood spread across his tailored white shirt like spilled ink. His final breath came wet and rattling, and then he was still. The alarm didn't stop. Boots pounded down the corridor, guards, perhaps others with orders to erase all evidence. Vukovic grabbed the console's flash drive, yanked it free, and ducked into the shadows. He had 20 seconds, maybe less, before he was boxed in. Moving fast, he ran down the corridor toward the service tunnel Andila had marked on his map. Shots rang out behind him. He turned a corner, ducked into the passage, and slammed the iron door shut just as rounds pinged off the frame. He ran through the dark like a man possessed, clutching the drive in one hand and his pistol in the other. The tunnel led him through forgotten Soviet bunkers beneath the villa, then into the open forest on the southern slope of this. Behind him, flames had begun to rise from the compound. Someone had triggered the failsafe. Let it burn, he thought. Let the ashes carry their own guilt. His only mission now was survival. He made it to the cove, where the fishing trawler was already waiting with its lights off, engines humming low like a predator. The captain, an old smuggler named Ivo, didn't ask questions. He simply hauled Vukovic aboard, shoved off, and turned east into the black waters. By the time they reached the mainland, the drive had already been copied onto a private server Vukovic used for cold cases. Its contents were damning. Logs of organ transfers, names of medical staff across Europe complicit in the scheme, shipment routes coded in government clearance formats, even video footage of surgeries performed on kidnapped refugees. Most horrifying of all, there were signed documents from multiple Croatian ministries greenlighting off-the-record humanitarian medical transfers, with Billick's signature and seal. It was enough to cripple a government. It was enough to get him killed. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Vukovic released the files anonymously to several foreign investigative outlets. A French newspaper ran a front-page exposé. A German TV network aired a documentary with pixelated footage of Billick's operations. The Croatian government denied everything, calling it foreign interference. But within a month, 3 mid-level ministers resigned, and a hospital director in Rijeka was found dead in an apparent suicide. On the streets, the whispers grew louder, about who was really in charge, about what price was paid for EU integration, and whether the ghosts of the war had ever truly left. As for Vukovic, he disappeared. No resignation letter. No forwarding address. Some said he went to Montenegro, others to Istanbul. A few even whispered he had taken another identity and now worked security for an international human rights group. But no one really knew. Only one person had contact with him after the leaks, Dr. Tahana Krilik. Once a month, she would receive a postcard with no return address, always depicting a city far from the Balkans, Bogota, Reykjavik, Nairobi. On the back, a single line. Sometimes it was a quote, sometimes a joke, sometimes just coordinates. But the message was always the same in spirit: I'm still watching. And in Split, by the sea where it had all begun, the people carried on. Tourists came and went, snapping photos of Diocletian's palace and sipping espresso under the sun, unaware of what had nearly remained buried. But some locals remembered. They remembered the rain. They remembered the blood. And they remembered a detective who didn't look away when the truth demanded action. His name was spoken rarely, but when it was, it came with a note of reverence and fear. Because they knew if the rot ever returned, so might he. Let's jump to next story. Story 10. The Marble Silence. Dubrovnik, Croatia, 2020. The morning sun bled gold across the terracotta rooftops of Dubrovnik, casting elongated shadows through the labyrinthine alleys of the old town. Tourists with cameras and guidebooks roamed obliviously through the stone veins of the ancient city, their laughter bouncing off cathedral walls while under their feet, beneath centuries of Roman foundations and Venetian marble, the rot of the modern underworld festered. It was in this dissonance, between postcard paradise and hidden decay, that Inspector Dario Rakic found himself walking with a cigarette burning low between his lips, eyes shaded behind mirrored sunglasses that reflected the city as a distorted, shimmering lie. He had received the call just after dawn, long before the cafes opened, before the cruise ships dumped their passengers, before the city wore its polished mask. The message had been short: Doc 6. Body. Possible political. And that was enough. Political, in this country, was code for something worse, something someone powerful didn't want to talk about. The docks were quiet when he arrived, save for the creak of ropes and the occasional slap of the sea against hulls. A fishing boat named Lusica bobbed slowly at the edge of the pier, its nets still dripping brine. A single officer stood nearby, pale and sweating, eyes fixed on something behind the boat's wheelhouse. As Dario stepped closer, the smell hit him first, an acrid stench of metal and decay. Then came the sight: a man's body crumpled in the corner, half concealed by a tarpaulin. His throat had been slit, not with the quick precision of a professional hit, but with the wild brutality of someone who wanted him to suffer. Blood had pooled and dried across the wooden planks. Dario crouched and examined the corpse. The victim was in his mid-30s, dressed in a cheap knockoff suit, shoes still polished, a thin line of dried foam at the corner of his lips. Poisoned and then butchered? Or had he been tortured into silence first? That was the question. Who found him? Dario asked without looking up. The officer, young, barely out of academy, cleared his throat. Captain of the boat, sir. Came in at 4. Says he's never seen him before. No ID. Dario nodded slowly. No ID meant someone had taken it, which meant the killer wasn't sloppy. They had just wanted the message to look personal, like a drunken fight gone wrong. But the location was too deliberate. The body had been left in the open, where it would be found, where it would raise questions. He stood, lighting another cigarette, the flick of his lighter harsh against the morning breeze. Send the body to forensics. Quietly. And pull the CCTV from every dock camera within 2 blocks. If any of them are offline, I want to know why. By noon, he was sitting in his office in Gruz, walls covered with city maps and blurry surveillance stills from unrelated crimes, when an envelope slid under the door. No return address, just a thick cream paper sealed in wax with a symbol he hadn't seen in years, a lion devouring a serpent. He stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal and pulling out the single sheet inside. Typed, elegant, it read. He knew about the shipments. You were warned. The sea swallows traitors. There was no signature, but Dario's mind was already racing. The shipments, yes, he had heard whispers. From the islands, from Trieste, from Montenegro. Unmarked containers moving in and out of the Adriatic under the guise of shell companies registered in Cyprus and Panama. Human cargo, some said. Others mentioned weapons. But the most chilling rumor was organs, harvested, catalogued, and sold to the highest bidder. The Adriatic, with its dozens of unpatrolled ports and tourist cover, was perfect. And now someone who knew too much had ended up gutted like a fish on a trawler. That night, Dario met an old contact at a ruined monastery near the city walls. She went by the name Lida, and she had once worked logistics for a shell company that imported seafood from the Albanian coast. In reality, she had coordinated ship movements for one of the largest black market networks in the Balkans. She was now in hiding, face thinner, eyes harder, but still sharp. It's Bakar, she told him under the flicker of a votive candle. The same group. They're calling themselves Braca Kraljevica now. Royal Brothers. Nationalist branding, but it's just a front. They're moving organs, kidneys, livers, from Syria, Libya, even local refugees. The man you found was a broker. I've seen him in Zadar once. He tried to flip, didn't he? Dario didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in Lida's eyes said she knew. Why tell me, he asked. If they find out you talked, but she shook her head. They already know. I'm dead to them, but I'd rather go down fighting than rotting in silence. She handed him a USB drive. This has dock records, ship names, fake manifests. It's not everything, but it's a start. Before he could say anything more, she disappeared into the shadows. By the time Dario got home, he knew he had crossed another line. The kind you don't come back from. The kind that gets people silenced in alleys, or found hanging from hotel balconies with fake suicide notes. That night, he sat alone in his apartment above the old city walls, watching the candlelight flicker across the USB drive on his kitchen table. Outside, the sea whispered secrets to the stones, and the city slept under a moonlit lie. Somewhere out there, the men who ran the network were already planning their next shipment. And now Dario had a choice: burn the evidence and walk away, or dive into the storm and risk drowning. The thing was, he had always known how this would end. In silence, maybe, or in fire. But he lit another cigarette and plugged the drive in anyway. The files on the USB opened slowly, like a confession drawn out under threat of violence. Most of it was coded language, abbreviations, shipping schedules, innocuous terms like live cargo or wet specimens. But Dario had seen enough intelligence reports to know exactly what the euphemisms meant. There were multiple references to shipments from the island of this, and even more alarming, several flagged entries to a ghost ship registered to a defunct medical NGO. That ship, Sveti Mihevil, had reportedly sunk off the Tunisian coast in 2016. Yet here it was, showing up on manifests as recently as last week, docking under aliases at small private ports between Dubrovnik and Split. Someone had brought it back from the dead, and Dario had no doubt it was now a floating abattoir. The deeper he dug, the more names began to bleed through the fog. Mid-level port authorities, retired army officers, a certain parliament aide in Zagreb with ties to a pharmaceutical conglomerate. It wasn't just a smuggling ring. It was a full-blown network of traffickers with institutional protection. The next morning, Dario drove north under a gray sky that threatened rain. His destination was a private marina outside Sebenik, owned by a holding company based in Luxembourg and leased to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A satellite image matched the coordinates of recent dockings by the Sveti Mihevil. Dario carried no badge that day, just a 9mm pistol under his coat and a camera hidden in the casing of a water bottle. He posed as a tourist interested in leasing dock space, weaving a story about yacht investments and rich Russian clients. The woman at the desk, blonde and bored, didn't care. "Go ahead," she said with a yawn, handing him a visitor's pass. "Just don't photograph the staff. We've had issues." That alone was a red flag. When he reached the end of Dock C, he saw her, the ship. She was repainted, renamed Orca, but the lines of the hull, the rust around the portholes, even the way she leaned slightly to starboard, all of it matched the pictures from her final voyage. He snapped 3 photos and left. He didn't linger. People were watching. That night, someone tried to kill him. He had just stepped into his flat when the world exploded. The blast didn't hit him directly. It came from the garage downstairs, but the shockwave shattered half the windows and tore through the ceiling. The fire alarms wailed like lost children as smoke coiled up the stairwell. Dario managed to escape through the emergency exit, coughing, with ash in his eyes and blood trickling from his ear. 3 cars were destroyed. The one he'd been driving the past week was reduced to black metal and melted glass. No doubt about it, a message had been sent. But they had made a mistake. They hadn't finished the job. Bleeding and furious, he didn't go to the station. Instead, he drove a borrowed car to a safe house outside Kavtat. There he met with an old friend from his military days, Milan Petrovich, now a freelance security contractor with a taste for dirty wars and no questions. "This is bigger than drugs," Dario told him, spreading the documents and photos across a worn table. "I need backup. Off the books." Milan, silent for a long moment, finally spoke. "You realize what this means? These people, you don't scare them. They cut deals with presidents. They'll erase you." Dario lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "They already tried. I'm not going quietly." Together, they made a plan. Step 1, leak the documents. Not to a government agency, but to journalists abroad, ones who still remembered how to dig without bribery. Step 2, intercept the Sveti Mihevil the next time she docked. That meant tracking her movements with help from Milan's drone network and timing the strike just right. The next docking was scheduled in 48 hours near Rogoznica. It was risky. If they failed, they'd vanish. If they succeeded, they might still die. But something inside Dario had cracked. He was tired of walking past bones buried under cathedrals. He was tired of hearing the sea whisper lies. They made their move at midnight, using a Zodiac boat with the engine cut low. The Sveti Mihevil loomed in the dark like a predator. There were guards, 3 men armed with AKs, wearing cheap tactical gear. Milan took out the first with a silenced shot. The second raised an alarm, but it was too late. Dario stormed the gangway with his pistol drawn. Inside, the horror unfolded room by room. Medical tables, plastic sheets, freezers, cold metal drawers stacked with containers labeled with organ types. A man in scrubs, surgeon or butcher, was trying to burn documents in a steel bin. Dario shot him in the leg. "Who runs this?" he demanded, grabbing the man by the collar. "Who do you answer to?" The man spit blood. "You think you're the first? They own everyone, even your minister." Then he smiled, an empty, broken grin, and passed out from the pain. They burned the ship. They had no time to offload all the evidence, no way to guarantee it wouldn't be wiped clean by powerful hands. But fire was honest. Flames didn't lie. The Sveti Miheville went up in an orange blaze that lit the Croatian coast like a funeral pyre. Before they disappeared, Milan uploaded the documents to an encrypted server and scheduled their release. Dario sent an anonymous copy to a Swiss journalist he trusted. Then they vanished off-grid into the Balkan shadows. Neither would live under their names again. A week later, news broke of a tragic marina fire, cause unknown. Local authorities denied any connection to trafficking. A low-level officer was scapegoated. Nothing made national headlines. But a few international reports began to surface: organ rings, Balkan smuggling routes, missing migrants. Whispers, footnotes, enough to shake the ground, if only slightly. And in a rented room overlooking Lake Ohrid, Dario watched it all unfold from behind dark sunglasses, knowing the war wasn't over. Just started. The marble silence of the Adriatic was cracking. Somewhere, someone was listening,